Finn the human stands before the ancient psychic tandem war elephant, hands trembling, mind racing through 1,000 possible futures. The elephant's twin trunks sway hypnotically, and somewhere in the chamber's echoing silence, a choice is being made that will define everything he believes about heroism, morality, and what it means to be good. He's been tested all day, not with swords or strength, but with something far more dangerous, his own assumptions about what heroes are supposed to do. And right now, every instinct in his 13-year-old brain is screaming at him to grab that ancient book and run. Because isn't that what heroes do? They seize power, defeat evil, claim the prize. Except the elephant is looking at him with those impossibly wise eyes, and Finn realizes with creeping horror that maybe, just maybe, everything he thought he knew about being a hero is completely, catastrophically wrong. This is where Adventure Time stops being a cute show about a kid and his magic dog and becomes something else entirely, something that will haunt you in the best possible way. In this video, we're going to explore the best episodes of Adventure Time, diving deep into the philosophy, emotion, and pure chaos that made this show a masterpiece that defined a generation. We'll laugh at the absurdity, cry at the tragedy, and question our entire existence because of a cartoon about sentient candy people. So get cozy, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's start this adventure with the episode that set the template for everything to come. The Enchiridion isn't just Season 1's big quest episode, it's Adventure Time's mission statement disguised as a dungeon crawl, and if you watch it closely, you'll see every major theme the show would explore over the next 8 seasons hiding in plain sight. The episode opens with Finn and Jake lounging in their treehouse, living their best lazy afternoon life, when Princess Bubblegum shows up with a quest. She's heard about the legendary Enchiridion, a hero's handbook hidden at the top of Mount Cragdor, and she thinks Finn is worthy enough to claim it. Finn, being Finn, loses his absolute mind with excitement. This is it. This is his hero moment. He's going to climb a mountain, fight some monsters, and claim an ancient artifact like every fantasy protagonist before him. Jake's along for the ride because that's what best friends do, even when your best friend is having a concerning amount of enthusiasm about medieval weaponry. But here's where Adventure Time starts showing its hand. The journey to Mount Cragdor isn't about fighting, it's about choices. Moral choices that don't have clear right answers, which is absolutely terrifying when you're a kid who just wants to punch bad guys and save princesses. The first test comes almost immediately. An old man with a poodle refuses to let them pass unless they slay the creature that's been terrorizing him. Finn, channeling every fantasy novel he's ever read in his mind, charges forward ready for battle. The creature turns out to be a cute little gnome family just trying to live their lives. The old man is the real villain, demanding violence for the sake of his own convenience. Finn realizes this and refuses to kill the gnomes, choosing compassion over blind obedience. The old man reveals himself as a guardian testing Finn's heroism, and suddenly this kid's cartoon is asking questions most fantasy stories never touch. What if the quest giver is wrong? What if the monster isn't the real monster? What if heroism means saying no to authority? This happens again and again. Finn encounters a giant ogre who demands they choose between 2 doors, one that leads forward, one that leads to certain death. Finn, in a moment of pure chaotic genius, refuses to choose and beats up the ogre instead. The ogre congratulates him for finding the third option, rejecting the false binary. Adventure Time just deconstructed the trolley problem in a show aimed at 6-year-olds, and nobody even noticed because we were too busy laughing at Jake stretching into weird shapes. The tests escalate. A demon asks Finn to give up his favourite thing. Most heroes would sacrifice something noble, something that makes them look good. Finn gives up his favourite dollar, a piece of paper he's cherished for years, and he does it without hesitation because sometimes heroism is about letting go of attachment. The show is pulling from Buddhist philosophy now, wrapping detachment and non-violence in candy-coloured animation and fart jokes. Then comes the Dark Magician, and this is where things get genuinely unsettling. He offers Finn a shortcut. Just wear these glasses and pretend you did the trials. Nobody will know. You'll still get the book, still be called a hero, and you can skip all this exhausting moral reasoning. The Dark Magician represents every temptation toward performative heroism, toward taking the easy path and faking virtue for social approval. He's offering Finn a chance to be a hero in name only, to have the title without the substance. Finn refuses, obviously, but what's brilliant is how hard the decision seems. The show doesn't pretend moral choices are easy. Finn is tired, frustrated, and probably questioning why saving the world has to involve so much philosophy when he could just be hitting things with his sword. But he keeps climbing because real heroism is doing the hard thing even when nobody's watching, even when the shortcut is right there, even when your legs hurt and your best friend is complaining about his bacon withdrawals. At the summit, Finn faces his final test, the mannish man and the ancient psychic tandem war elephant. This scene is surreal even by Adventure Time standards. The elephant has two heads and speaks in riddles. The mannish man is just some dude standing there, and Finn has no idea what he's supposed to do. The elephant says he'll give Finn the Enchiridion if Finn kisses the mannish man on the lips. No context, no explanation. Just a bizarre, uncomfortable request that makes zero sense in the logic of heroes' journeys. Finn hesitates. This isn't battling evil or saving the innocent. This is weird. This is uncomfortable. This is asking him to do something that feels wrong, not because it's immoral, but because it's outside his understanding of how hero quests work. And that's precisely the point. The elephant isn't testing Finn's combat skills or even his morality anymore. He's testing whether Finn can act with kindness and humility, even when the request makes him uncomfortable, even when it doesn't fit the script he's been following in his head. Finn leans in. He's about to do it. And the elephant stops him, declaring that Finn has passed the test. The willingness was enough. The mannish man transforms, revealing himself as the final guardian, and Finn claims the Enchiridion not through violence or strength or even clever problem-solving, but through his capacity for compassion and his willingness to be vulnerable. The episode could end there with a neat moral lesson, but Adventure Time always has one more trick. Finn opens the Enchiridion expecting detailed instructions on how to be a hero, and instead finds a book that's part philosophy text, part nonsense, full of vague advice about being righteous and good. There's no manual for heroism. There's no step-by-step guide. The book literally tells him to do right by you and yours, which is about as specific as a fortune cookie written by a stoned wizard. Finn is disappointed, Jake is confused, and the audience realises that Adventure Time just spent 22 minutes teaching us that heroism isn't something you can learn from a book. It's something you build through choices, through failures, through awkward, uncomfortable moments where you have to figure out right and wrong without a clear rulebook. The real Enchiridion was the moral development we made along the way, and yes, that's partially a meme, but it's also completely true. What makes this episode one of Adventure Time's best isn't just its cleverness or its unexpected philosophy, it's how it establishes the show's core DNA. Adventure Time would spend 8 seasons exploring what it means to be good when the universe is weird and morality is complicated, and everyone you love is dealing with their own trauma. It would show us that Ice King isn't a villain but a tragedy, that Princess Bubblegum's benevolent dictatorship has moral costs, that Jake's laid-back wisdom hides genuine fear of mortality, that Marceline's been carrying 1,000 years of abandonment, that even BMO's childlike innocence raises questions about consciousness and identity. All of it starts here. All of it starts with a 13-year-old boy learning that saving the world isn't about swinging swords. It's about choosing compassion when violence would be easier, about questioning authority when everyone expects obedience, about doing the hard thing even when nobody's watching. Finn faces every challenge in this episode not with the power he has, but with the person he's trying to become. That's what makes him a hero. Not the muscles, not the sword. The choice to keep trying to be better even when the universe makes it really, really weird. The episode ends with Finn and Jake heading home, book in hand, still not entirely sure what they've learned, but knowing something important happened on that mountain. They joke and laugh and probably stop for snacks, because that's how Adventure Time works. Profound revelation followed immediately by sandwich discourse. The show understands that life isn't all deep philosophy or all absurd humour. It's both, constantly, sometimes in the same sentence. You can contemplate the nature of heroism and then debate whether bacon is objectively better than pancakes, because we're complex beings living in a ridiculous universe, and that's okay. Looking back now, after watching Finn grow from that eager 13-year-old into someone who understands how complicated goodness really is, the Enchiridion hits differently. This is where it all begins. This is where Adventure Time plants the seeds for Finn's eventual disillusionment with simple heroism, his struggles with his father's abandonment, his realization that some problems can't be solved with fighting. This episode promises that heroes are tested by their choices, and then the show spends years putting Finn through increasingly impossible choices until he breaks, rebuilds, and becomes someone entirely new. The ancient psychic tandem war elephant asked Finn to prove his heroism through compassion. Years later, Finn would lose his arm saving his father who didn't deserve saving. He would manipulate Flame Princess to satisfy his own curiosity. He would build a tower of rage to the sky, trying to destroy the man who abandoned him. He would learn that sometimes doing the right thing still hurts people you love. The tests never stop getting harder. The answers never get clearer, but the foundation stays the same. Heroism is measured in kindness, in the willingness to be vulnerable, in choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. Isn't that the real adventure? Not the destinations or the artifacts or the magical swords, but the slow, painful process of becoming someone who chooses compassion even when the universe gives you every reason not to. The Enchiridion couldn't teach Finn that in a manual because it's not knowledge, it's practice. It's every small choice compounding over years until you look back and realize you're not the same person who climbed that mountain. You're better, or you're trying to be. And in the Land of Ooo, where chaos reigns and nothing makes sense and the bad guy might actually be a sick old man who forgot who he used to be, trying is enough. That's what makes this episode essential. That's what makes it one of the best. Not because it's the funniest or the most emotional or the most technically impressive, but because it's the seed from which everything else grows. Adventure Time starts here, with a boy and his dog and a weird talking elephant, learning that the greatest power isn't strength or magic or even friendship. It's the choice to keep being kind in a world that really doesn't make it easy. Here's what Adventure Time does that most shows would never dare. It takes its most pathetic, annoying, seemingly one-note villain and reveals that he's actually the most tragic character in the entire series. Not gradually, not with subtle hints spread across seasons. No, Adventure Time waits until you've spent dozens of episodes laughing at Ice King's failures, rolling your eyes at his creepy princess kidnapping, making jokes about his terrible fanfiction, and then it drops. I remember you on you like an emotional atom bomb that retroactively changes everything you thought you knew about this show. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start with what Ice King was before the show broke our hearts and rebuilt them wrong. For the first few seasons, Ice King is simple. He's the villain. The annoying one who shows up, kidnaps a princess, gets beaten up by Finn and Jake, and flies away shouting about his loneliness. He's pathetic in that comedic way where you're supposed to laugh at him, not with him. He writes terrible self-insert fiction where he's cool and everyone loves him. He forces his penguin Gunter to wear princess dresses. He smells bad. He's desperate for companionship but has zero social awareness about why everyone finds him creepy. He's the antagonist you don't take seriously because the show doesn't seem to take him seriously. Then, Holly Jolly Secrets happens in Season 3, and suddenly there's VHS tapes. Ice King is recording video diaries to himself because his memory is deteriorating, and he doesn't know why. The tapes are silly at first, full of Ice King being his usual ridiculous self, making dumb observations about his day, talking to Gunter like Gunter understands. Standard Ice King nonsense. Finn and Jake watch them looking for villain secrets, expecting some master plan or hidden weakness they can exploit. Instead, they find Simon Petrikov, a man, a human man from before the Mushroom War, back when the world was normal and not a post-apocalyptic candy wasteland. An antiquarian who found a strange crown in Scandinavia and made the catastrophic mistake of putting it on. The crown gave him visions, drove him slowly insane, made him lose everything. His fiancée Betty, his sanity, his humanity, his entire world. The tapes show his descent in heartbreaking detail. Simon begging Betty to stay away from him because he's becoming dangerous. Simon realizing he's losing time, losing memories, losing himself. Simon putting on the crown one final time as the bombs fell because it was the only way to survive the apocalypse, knowing that survival meant becoming something else entirely. The episode ends with Ice King in the present, watching his own tapes, crying without understanding why. He doesn't remember Simon. He doesn't remember Betty. He doesn't remember being human. All that's left is this vague, aching loneliness and a compulsion to kidnap princesses that he can't explain because the crown has rewritten his entire personality around its cursed programming. Ice King is gone. Simon is gone. What's left is something trapped between two identities, remembering nothing but feeling everything. Adventure Time just revealed that every time we laughed at Ice King's failures, we were laughing at a man trapped in his own deteriorating mind, acting out patterns he no longer understands. Every creepy princess kidnapping is his crown-corrupted brain trying to recreate something it barely remembers about love and companionship. Every moment of pathetic desperation is real suffering filtered through magical dementia. The show took its joke villain and said actually he's a tragedy, and you've been watching his mental illness play out as comedy for 3 seasons. Most shows would stop there. That's enough devastation for one character arc. But Adventure Time isn't most shows, and the real emotional apocalypse comes in Season 4 with I Remember You. The episode opens innocently enough. Ice King shows up at Marceline's house asking her to help him write a song for princesses. She's annoyed but tolerates him in that way you tolerate someone you have history with, even when they're being insufferable. They start jamming together, Ice King playing keyboard while Marceline plays bass, and there's this weird familiarity between them that doesn't quite make sense. Ice King keeps pulling out scraps of paper with cryptic phrases, trying to turn them into lyrics. "You're the only one for me, baby." Is it getting better, or do you feel the same? Random fragments that seem meaningless. Marceline sees the papers and something shifts. Her expression changes. These aren't just random phrases, they're messages. Messages from Simon Petrikov to Marceline the child, written in the early days of the apocalypse when he was still fighting the crown's influence, still trying to hold on to who he was. Ice King has been carrying these papers for decades, maybe centuries, without understanding what they mean. To him they're just interesting words. To Marceline, they're archaeological evidence of someone she loved and lost. The episode becomes this devastating dance where Marceline tries to make Ice King remember who he was, tries to remind Simon that she's the little girl he protected during the apocalypse, and Ice King just doesn't get it. He thinks she's being weird. He's confused why she's getting emotional about songwriting. Every attempt to connect bounces off the wall of his amnesia. Marceline is talking to a ghost. Simon is gone, and the thing wearing his face doesn't even know who Marceline is anymore. Then comes the moment that emotionally destroyed an entire generation. Marceline starts singing the messages as lyrics, turning Simon's desperate notes into a heartbreaking song. "Marceline, is it just you and me in the wreckage of the world? That must be so confusing for a little girl. And I know you're going to need me here with you, but I'm losing myself and I'm afraid you're going to lose me too." Ice King joins in without understanding. He's singing words about his own tragedy, about losing himself to the crown, about abandoning someone he loved, and he has no idea. No idea that he wrote these words. No idea that the vampire queen crying across from him is the scared little girl he saved. No idea that he's singing about his own death while standing in the corpse of who he used to be. The song ends. Marceline is in tears. Ice King thinks they wrote a pretty good tune and wonders why everyone's always so emotional around him. The episode closes with Marceline alone, looking at old photos of her and Simon from the post-apocalypse. Simon wearing the crown, protecting her, slowly losing his mind while trying to keep one child safe in a dying world. And we realise that Marceline's been carrying this grief for centuries. Her father abandoned her. Her mother died when she was young. Simon was the only person who stayed, who protected her, who saw her as a daughter when the world was ending. And then the crown took him too, turning him into this pathetic ice wizard who doesn't remember loving her but can't stop trying to kidnap princesses in some twisted echo of wanting a family. This is what Adventure Time does better than almost anything else on television. It layers tragedy underneath whimsy until you don't know whether to laugh or cry, so you do both. Ice King remains silly. He's still writing terrible self-insert fiction, and getting beaten up by Finn and Jake and forcing Gunther into costumes. But now every moment is tinted with this unbearable sadness, because we know what was lost. We know that somewhere underneath the madness and the ridiculous wizard beard, Simon Petrikov is still in there, maybe, screaming silently while Ice King does a silly dance and steals another princess. The show doesn't let us forget this either. Simon and Marcy comes later as a flashback episode, showing us Simon and young Marceline surviving the immediate post-apocalypse together. Simon is still mostly himself, still fighting the Crown's influence, but he's losing. The episode is structured around their search for chicken soup in a destroyed city, because Marceline is sick, and Simon is desperately trying to be the father figure she needs while slowly going insane. We watch Simon put on the crown repeatedly to protect Marceline from mutants and monsters, and each time he puts it on, he loses a little more of himself. Each time he takes it off, he's more confused, more distant, more Ice King, and less Simon. Marceline is 7 years old and watching her only protector deteriorate in real time. She's sick and scared, and the world is full of monsters, and the one person keeping her safe is becoming a monster himself, just slowly, just in a way where she can see it happening and can't do anything to stop it. The emotional centerpiece of the episode is Simon finding a working tape player and a Cheers cassette tape. He plays it for Marceline to cheer her up, and in this moment of beautiful absurdity, we see two survivors of the apocalypse listening to a sitcom theme song in a destroyed Radio Shack. Marceline is sick. Simon is losing his mind. The world has ended. And they're listening to Where Everybody Knows Your Name, like it's the most important thing in existence, because maybe it is. Maybe holding on to these tiny pieces of the old world is the only way to stay human when everything else is ash. Marceline eventually writes her own song about this moment. Everything Stays becomes her thesis on trauma, how things change and transform but never really leave you. The Crown changed Simon. The apocalypse changed the world. Time changed Marceline from a scared child to an immortal vampire queen. But everything stays, right where you left it, in memory if nowhere else. Simon is gone but also still here, trapped in Ice King's body, occasionally surfacing in moments of confusion and pain. The tragedy deepens when you realise what this means for Marceline's character. She's 1,000 years old, give or take. She's watched everyone she loved either die or leave or go mad. Her mother, dead. Her father, a literal demon who abandoned her. Simon, gone, replaced by a man-child ice wizard. She's immortal and alone, and every relationship she forms is shadowed by the knowledge that she'll outlive them, or they'll leave, or the universe will find some creative way to take them from her. No wonder she's standoffish. No wonder she keeps people at arm's length. No wonder her relationship with Princess Bubblegum is complicated by centuries of emotional scar tissue. And Ice King just keeps showing up, keeps being annoying, keeps kidnapping princesses and writing fanfiction and generally being the show's comedic punching bag. Except now we can't laugh the same way because we know. Every time Finn punches Ice King, we're watching a boy beat up a mentally ill old man who used to be a hero. Every time someone mocks Ice King's desperate loneliness, we're watching them mock a man whose entire personality was destroyed by a cursed artifact and now he can't even remember why he's lonely or what he lost. Adventure Time refuses to let us off the hook for this either. The show keeps Ice King as comic relief, keeps him doing silly things and being pathetic and losing fights. Because that's the point. The tragedy isn't just that Simon became Ice King, it's that everyone sees Ice King as a joke, as a nuisance, as someone whose suffering is funny because he's so ridiculous about it. The show makes us complicit in laughing at dementia disguised as wizard antics, but it's not all devastation. Adventure Time being Adventure Time, there are moments of weird grace. Ice King occasionally has flashes of lucidity, where Simon surfaces briefly, confused and scared. He forms genuine friendships with unlikely people. His rivalry-turned friendship with Finn and Jake becomes almost sweet in later seasons. He builds a strange companionship with the other wizards. He finds moments of happiness even trapped in his curse, even if he can't remember why he's cursed or what he's lost. There's something profound in that. Simon is gone, maybe forever, and Ice King will never understand the full scope of his tragedy. But Ice King still experiences joy, still loves his penguins, still gets excited about princess time, still writes his terrible stories with genuine enthusiasm. He's living a half-life, a shadow existence, but he's still finding reasons to keep going, even though everything that made him human was stripped away centuries ago. Is that hopeful or horrifying? Adventure Time doesn't pick. It lets both truths exist simultaneously. Ice King is a tragedy, and also he's a silly wizard who makes penguins wear dresses. Simon Petrikov is gone, and also he's right there. trapped behind blue skin and magical dementia, occasionally surfacing in weird non sequiturs that could be crown programming or could be memories trying to break through. Marceline carries grief for someone who's standing right in front of her but completely unreachable. The show does eventually give this storyline something resembling resolution in later seasons and the Distant Land specials, but that's almost beside the point. What matters is what these episodes did to the show's DNA. After I Remember You, Adventure Time could never be purely innocent again. The Land of Ooo was built on the ashes of human civilization. Every silly character potentially carried war trauma. Every joke potentially hid tragedy. The show had revealed that its brightly coloured fantasy world was actually a post-apocalyptic nightmare, where survivors coped with existential horror through forced whimsy, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. Ice King isn't the villain, he's a victim of his own curiosity, of an ancient curse, of an apocalypse that destroyed everything and everyone he loved. A victim of time itself, which kept him alive long enough to forget why he wanted to live. And every time he shows up with his stupid wizard robes and his creepy princess obsession and his pathetic attempts at connection, we're supposed to remember that somewhere in there, a man named Simon Petrikov is trapped in a nightmare he can't wake up from, reaching out for something he can't remember losing. How do you come back from that? How do you watch Ice King slip on a banana peel after the show has told you he used to be someone's everything, someone's protector, someone's lost connection to a dead world? You laugh anyway, because what else can you do? You laugh and you cry and you hold both responses in your heart simultaneously, because that's what Adventure Time taught us trauma looks like. Not clean, not simple, not easily resolved, just people trying to survive their own damage while the universe keeps being weird and beautiful and terrible all at once. That's why these episodes are among the show's best. Not because they're entertaining, though they are. Not because they're clever, though they're devastatingly clever. But because they taught an entire generation that comedy and tragedy aren't opposites. They're roommates sharing space in the same broken heart. That you can love someone who doesn't remember loving you back. That losing yourself is scarier than losing everything else. That sometimes the saddest stories are the ones where the suffering person doesn't even know they're suffering because they've forgotten what happiness felt like. Simon would have hated becoming Ice King, but Ice King doesn't know enough to hate what he's become. Is that mercy, or is it the cruelest part of the curse? Adventure Time asks and refuses to answer, leaving us with the uncomfortable truth that sometimes people are gone before they're dead, and sometimes the people we love become strangers who wear familiar faces. Sometimes the best we can do is remember them as they were, sing songs about the past and hope that somewhere in the wreckage something good remains. Do you think Simon would be proud of who Ice King became, if he could see himself? Or would he be horrified that his struggle to stay sane was lost, that the crown won completely, that Marceline spent centuries mourning someone who was still technically alive but completely unreachable? There's no good answer. There's just Ice King flying away to his ice castle, already forgetting this conversation happened, while Marceline floats there wondering if she should have tried harder to make him remember, or if it's kinder to let the dead rest even when they're still walking around singing off-key songs about princesses. Princess Bubblegum creates life from sugar and science, watches it grow, watches it fail, watches it die, and then creates more because that's what gods do when they're lonely. Except she's not a god. She's a woman who's been alive too long, who's seen too much, who's learned that control is the only thing standing between civilization and chaos, and who's slowly suffocating under the weight of her own competence. She builds a kingdom out of candy. She engineers sentient beings from glucose. She survives assassination attempts, coups, existential threats, and her own creations turning against her. And through it all, she maintains this veneer of pink perfection, this carefully constructed image of the benevolent ruler who has everything under control, while inside she's screaming because immortality means watching everyone you love either leave or crumble, or reveal themselves as fundamentally disappointing. Adventure Time gives us a lot of complicated characters, but Princess Bubblegum might be the most unsettling because she's right about almost everything, and that somehow makes it worse. Let's start with the surveillance state, because we need to talk about how Princess Bubblegum runs the Candy Kingdom like a benevolent dictatorship, wrapped in pastel colours and scientific enthusiasm. She has cameras everywhere. She monitors her citizens constantly. She's created an entire civilization of candy people who are, let's be honest, not particularly intelligent and require near-constant supervision to avoid accidentally killing themselves through sheer confectionery stupidity. Banana guards who can't guard anything, candy people who panic at the slightest inconvenience, a population that needs a brilliant immortal scientist princess to make literally every important decision because they're functionally children in adult candy bodies. And here's the uncomfortable part, she's probably right to do it. The Candy Kingdom would collapse without her. Her people would die, get conquered, or accidentally set themselves on fire trying to make toast. Princess Bubblegum isn't power-hungry in the traditional villain sense. She's power-hungry in the exhausted parent sense, where if you don't control everything, someone's going to get hurt and it's going to be your responsibility. She's created a kingdom of dependence, and now she's trapped maintaining it forever, because letting go means watching everything she built crumble. The show introduces her as this perfect princess, smart, kind, beautiful, scientifically brilliant. Finn has a massive crush on her for seasons because she represents everything a hero's supposed to want. The pink princess in the candy castle, who bakes and does science and needs rescuing occasionally. Except as the series progresses, we realise Princess Bubblegum doesn't need rescuing. She's the most dangerous person in Ooo. Not because she's evil, but because she's willing to make the hard choices that everyone else is too squeamish or too moral to consider. She'll sacrifice people for the greater good. She'll lie to maintain order. She'll create life and destroy it with equal clinical detachment when the experiment goes wrong. She's utilitarian ethics personified, walking around in a pink dress, smiling that perfect smile while calculating acceptable losses in her head. And the terrifying part is that her math usually works out. The Candy Kingdom thrives under her rule. Her people are safe, fed, happy in their simple candy way. The dictatorship functions. The surveillance prevents crime. The lack of freedom prevents chaos. But at what cost to her? That's what makes these episodes devastating. What Was Missing arrives in Season 3 and pretends to be a silly episode about a door-stealing thief. But it's actually about emotional vulnerability and how Princess Bubblegum has built walls so high she can barely see over them anymore. The Door Lord steals everyone's most prized possessions, and to get them back, Finn, Jake, BMO, Marceline, and Princess Bubblegum have to form a band and play a genuine song about their feelings. Not complicated, not difficult. Except for people who've spent years avoiding genuine emotional expression, it's basically impossible. Marceline immediately uses this as an opportunity to be passive-aggressive at Princess Bubblegum, singing this pointed song about someone who thinks they're so perfect and mature, when really they're just repressed and controlling. It's devastating and catchy, which is very on-brand for Marceline. Princess Bubblegum sits there maintaining her diplomatic smile while getting emotionally destroyed in song form in front of everyone. And she can't even defend herself properly because that would require admitting that Marceline's criticisms are accurate, and Princess Bubblegum doesn't do vulnerable. The Door Lord's magic requires genuine emotion to break. Finn's desperate desire to be a hero works. Jake's love for his viola works. BMO's innocent affection works. But Princess Bubblegum's song is too controlled, too measured, too trapped behind layers of political calculation and emotional armour. She literally cannot express genuine feeling on demand because she's trained herself out of it. She's engineered her own emotions into submission the same way she engineers everything else, and now when she needs them, they won't respond. Then Marceline pulls out the shirt, the rock concert t-shirt that Princess Bubblegum gave her years or decades or centuries ago, which Marceline has kept all this time as her most precious possession. And suddenly, this silly door-stealing episode becomes about the thing Adventure Time does better than almost any show. Complicated queer relationships wrapped in plausible deniability and emotional devastation. Bubblegum gave Marceline her shirt. Marceline kept it. Marceline treasures it above everything else she owns despite being an immortal vampire queen with presumably centuries of accumulated possessions. The show doesn't explicitly state what this means, but come on. Come on. That's not heterosexual behaviour. That's not even plausibly deniable subtext. That's text wearing a thin disguise made of candy wrappers and pretending everyone can't see exactly what's happening. Princess Bubblegum's face when she sees the shirt is everything. Surprise, confusion, something that might be joy if she let it reach the surface, Immediate suppression of all of those feelings back down into the vault where emotions go to die. She can't process this. Marceline, who just sang an entire song about how emotionally constipated Bubblegum is, has been holding on to a piece of clothing like it's a religious relic. The cognitive dissonance breaks something in Bubblegum's carefully maintained composure. She tries to dismiss it, tries to make it casual. "I didn't know you kept that shirt," said in that tone that means she definitely knew it was significant, definitely understands what it means that Marceline kept it, and definitely cannot deal with those implications right now because she has a kingdom to run, and emotions are inefficient, and vulnerability leads to getting hurt, which leads to losing control, which leads to people dying because she wasn't strong enough to prevent it. The band plays together, the door opens, everyone gets their stuff back. The episode ends with unresolved tension hanging in the air like cotton candy, dissolving into awkwardness. Because that's how these things work in you. Nothing gets resolved cleanly. People carry wounds for centuries, and sometimes your ex-girlfriend shows up to call you emotionally repressed via song, and she's absolutely right. But you still can't talk about it, because talking about it would require admitting you're a person with needs and fears instead of a perfect pink princess who has everything figured out. Varmints comes much later, in season 7, and it's essentially a post-breakup episode where we get to see exactly how Bubblegum and Marceline's relationship fell apart. They're trying to hang out again, trying to repair years or decades or centuries of accumulated damage, and neither of them knows how to be vulnerable anymore. Bubblegum suggests they do their old tradition of hunting varmints in her castle, which sounds cute until you realise this is how they spent time together. Killing pests. Very romantic. Very emotionally available. Marceline shows up ready to connect, and immediately Princess Bubblegum starts optimising everything. She's turned varmint hunting into an efficient system. She's installed special lights. She's scientifically solved the varmint problem, which means their tradition is now obsolete, which means they don't have an excuse to hang out anymore. And she doesn't see the problem with this because efficiency is good, and solving problems is good, and why is Marceline getting upset about progress? Because it's not about the varmints, Bonnie. It's never about the varmints. They argue in this way that only people with centuries of shared history can argue, where every word carries 17 layers of subtext and old wounds. Marceline accuses Bubblegum of changing, of becoming too focused on her responsibilities, of choosing the kingdom over their relationship. Bubblegum, with infinite diplomatic patience, explains that yes, she has responsibilities. Yes, people depend on her. Yes, she can't just abandon an entire civilization to hunt pests in her attic, like they're still teenagers. Both of them are right. Both of them are hurt. Neither of them knows how to bridge the gap. Then Bubblegum's Uncle Gumbald shows up. Long story involving brainwashing and family betrayal and candy mutations. And suddenly there's a real threat. A legitimate crisis that requires Bubblegum to shift into crisis management mode, which is where she's most comfortable because dealing with emergencies is easier than dealing with emotions. She tries to handle it scientifically, diplomatically, through negotiation and careful calculation of variables and outcomes. Marceline just hits him with a bass guitar. Problem solved. And Bubblegum is shocked. Not angry, not disappointed, but genuinely shocked that sometimes violence is the answer. That sometimes you can't negotiate with people who want to destroy you. That sometimes efficiency and diplomatic solutions don't work and you just need someone who loves you enough to fight your fights without calculating the political ramifications first. Marceline did what Bubblegum never lets herself do. She acted on pure emotion, on protective rage, on the simple calculation that someone threatened Bonnie and therefore needed to get bass guitared into next week. This breaks something in Bubblegum. Not in a bad way, in a necessary way. She realises she's so busy being perfect, being responsible, being the eternal princess who never makes mistakes, that she's forgotten how to let people help her, how to be vulnerable. How to admit that carrying an entire kingdom on your shoulders for centuries is heavy and lonely, and sometimes you just want your girlfriend to show up and solve problems with violence, so you don't have to calculate the ethical implications of every decision. They reconcile. Kind of. In that complicated way where nothing's really fixed but they've agreed to try again, to be better at communication, to remember that relationships require actually being present instead of hiding behind responsibilities. The episode ends with them hanging out in comfortable silence, no varmints to hunt, just existing together without needing to optimize or solve or control anything. It's character growth, Bubblegum style, which means acknowledging a problem, creating a systematic solution, and then maybe, possibly, allowing yourself to feel something about it if time permits. But we need to talk about the vault, because this episode reveals something crucial about Princess Bubblegum's relationship with mortality and control. Finn discovers through past life regression that he's been reincarnated many times, living multiple lives across Oo's history. One of those lives was as Shoko, a one-armed thief in ancient times when Princess Bubblegum's kingdom was just beginning. Shoko meets young Princess Bubblegum, still pink, still scientifically brilliant, still creating life, but noticeably more innocent, more trusting, more open to connection. They become friends, real friends, not the complicated political alliances adult Bubblegum specialises in. Shoko is hired to steal from Bubblegum but ends up genuinely caring about her, which creates a moral crisis when her employer demands she complete the job. The tragedy of this episode is watching what happens to Shoko, but the deeper tragedy is watching what happens to Bubblegum. Shoko betrays her, not out of malice, but out of desperation and bad decisions and the complicated morality of being poor and exploited. She steals from Bubblegum's castle, gets mortally wounded, and dies trying to return what she took because she couldn't live with betraying the one person who showed her genuine kindness. Bubblegum finds Shoko's body centuries later, still preserved, still clutching the stolen amulet, still trying to make things right. And you can see in Bubblegum's face the exact moment when she makes a decision about trust, about vulnerability, about what happens when you let people in and they hurt you. Young Bubblegum was open and warm and got betrayed. Modern Bubblegum learned from that, learned that trust is dangerous, learned that controlling everything is the only way to prevent getting hurt again. Shoko's betrayal isn't the only reason Bubblegum became who she is, but it's part of the pattern. Centuries of small betrayals, small disappointments, small moments of vulnerability that ended badly. Marceline leaving. Citizens proving themselves incapable of self-governance. Creations turning against her. Uncle Gumball trying to kill her. Lemongrab descending into authoritarian madness. Every time Bubblegum extended trust, the universe punished her for it, so she stopped extending trust and started extending surveillance instead. The show doesn't present this as evil, it presents it as tragedy. Princess Bubblegum learned the wrong lesson from her pain. She learned that love and openness lead to suffering, so she built walls and called it wisdom. She learned that control prevents loss, so she controlled everything and called it responsibility. She's not wrong that Ooo is dangerous, and her people need protection. She's wrong that she has to carry that burden alone, without help, without vulnerability, without ever admitting that she's tired and scared and so incredibly lonely behind her perfect pink smile. Because here's the thing about immortality that Adventure Time understands better than most fantasy shows. It's not a gift. Living forever means watching everything you build eventually crumble. Every friendship has an expiration date. Every lover either leaves or dies or changes into someone unrecognizable. The Candy Kingdom will outlast most of its citizens. Bubblegum will bury generations of her people. She'll rule and create and protect and lose, over and over, for centuries, possibly forever, and you can't maintain emotional connections through that. You can't love people knowing you'll watch them age and die while you stay young and pink and perfect. It's too painful. So you start seeing them as subjects instead of individuals, as problems to solve instead of people to know. You engineer emotions out of your decision-making because emotions are inefficient when you're playing the long game. You become what Princess Bubblegum became, a brilliant, lonely god in a candy castle, surrounded by creations that depend on you but can never truly understand you. Marceline understands. Marceline is also immortal. That's why their relationship is so important and so complicated. They're the only two people in Ooo who know what it's like to watch centuries pass, to lose everything repeatedly, to remember when the world was different. They should be perfect for each other. They're both carrying the same weight, but they cope differently. Marceline retreats into isolation and music and carefully maintained emotional distance. Bubblegum dives into control and responsibility and scientific solutions. Marceline gave up on fixing things. Bubblegum can't stop trying to fix everything. Marceline lets herself feel pain and anger and grief. Bubblegum files those emotions away in mental boxes labelled non-essential and focuses on governance instead. Neither approach is wrong. Neither is sustainable. That's why they keep hurting each other. That's why they keep coming back. Because maybe together they make one functional immortal person who remembers how to feel without drowning in it, and how to act without detaching completely. Maybe that's what love is when you're going to live forever, finding someone equally broken in compatible ways. The show eventually gives them something resembling a happy ending, but that's not really the point. The point is understanding why Princess Bubblegum is the way she is, why she micromanages her kingdom, why she struggles with trust, why she built an entire civilization that needs her to function, because if they didn't need her, what would she be? Just another immortal wandering with nothing to do but remember everyone she's lost. The Candy Kingdom isn't just her legacy, it's her purpose, her identity, her excuse for not dealing with the existential horror of infinite existence. As long as the kingdom needs her, she matters. As long as there are problems to solve, she doesn't have to think about how many centuries she's been solving problems, or how many more centuries of problem-solving await her. As long as she's indispensable, she doesn't have to face the possibility that maybe she wants to be dispensable. Maybe she wants someone else to make the hard choices. Maybe she's tired. But gods don't get to be tired. Rulers don't get to admit weakness. Brilliant scientific princesses who hold civilization together through sheer force of will and strategic candy architecture don't get to say they need help, because what if help doesn't come? What if she asks for support and discovers she really is alone, that everyone needs her but nobody knows her, that she's built a kingdom of dependence but no real connections? Better to maintain control, better to smile and optimize and solve, better to keep everyone at arm's length where they can't hurt you, can't disappoint you, can't die and leave you alone again. Better to be the perfect princess who never breaks, because if she breaks, who's going to hold the kingdom together? Who's going to protect the candy people from themselves and the world and the endless chaos of Ooo? That's the weight of immortality. That's what the crown represents. Not literal magic, but the burden of responsibility that never ends. The loneliness of being the only one who remembers. The exhaustion of caring about people who will die while you continue. Princess Bubblegum doesn't need a magic crown to be cursed. Her curse is competence. Her curse is immortality. Her curse is loving a world that changes while she stays the same, building and protecting and losing forever. So when Marceline shows up with her bass guitar and her emotional availability, and her willingness to just hit problems instead of overthinking them, is it any wonder Bubblegum doesn't know how to handle it? Marceline represents everything Bubblegum gave up to maintain control, spontaneity, vulnerability, the freedom to be messy and wrong, and hurt without the weight of an entire kingdom's survival, depending on your decisions. Marceline gets to be a person. Bubblegum has to be a princess. And maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that they broke up, but that Bubblegum chose the crown over the relationship and then spent centuries wondering if she made the right choice. There's no neat answer here. Bubblegum can't abandon her responsibilities. People would actually die. But she also can't keep carrying everything alone without losing more of herself to the role. The show understands this tension and refuses to resolve it cleanly because life doesn't resolve cleanly, especially when that life lasts for centuries and involves ruling candy people who think windows are portals to another dimension. All we can do is watch Princess Bubblegum try. Try to be better. Try to be vulnerable. Try to let people in without losing control. Try to remember that efficiency isn't the same as happiness, and that sometimes the optimal solution is suboptimal, because it involves messy human, or candy, or vampire connection. Try to carry the weight of immortality without letting it crush what's left of her capacity for joy. And hope that maybe, eventually, she figures out that being perfect isn't the same as being whole. That control is a poor substitute for connection. That the kingdom would probably survive without her, and that's okay. And maybe it's even necessary if she wants to be more than just a crown and a title, and an endless list of problems that need solving. But she probably won't figure that out. Because some curses don't break. Some people carry their burdens until the end of time. Some princesses rule forever, maintaining perfect facades while slowly calcifying into the roles they've built. And sometimes the Candy Kingdom thrives while its ruler quietly suffocates under the weight of her own competence, smiling that perfect smile, already calculating the next century's problems, already alone. Jake the dog stretches his body into a boat, then a bridge, then a house, then whatever shape the moment requires. And for most of the series, we assume this is just fun cartoon magic without deeper implications. He's the comic relief. The laid-back older brother who says dude a lot and makes bacon pancakes and dispenses stoner wisdom about letting things slide off you like water off a duck's back. He's simple, uncomplicated. The chill counterbalance to Finn's heroic intensity. Except Adventure Time doesn't do simple, and around Season 6 the show casually drops the revelation that Jake's entire existence is built on a lie. His powers come from an alien shapeshifter that bit his dad, and everything he thought he knew about his identity is fundamentally wrong. And then, because this is Adventure Time, Jake has to process this existential nightmare while still being everyone's goofy dog friend who solves problems by stretching into improbable shapes. The alien dad revelation hits different because Jake isn't prepared for it. Finn gets abandonment issues served to him regularly. His human parents are a mystery, his father turns out to be garbage, his mother's fate is tragic. Finn's entire character arc involves processing parental trauma, but Jake had good parents. Joshua and Margaret were heroes. They raised him and Finn with love and adventure stories and combat training. Jake's childhood was stable, warm, full of the kind of parental affection that most characters in Ooo can only fantasize about. His identity was secure. He knew who he was. Joshua and Margaret's son, Finn's brother, a dog with magic powers inherited from some vague magical ancestry that nobody questioned, because this is Ooo and weird powers are standard. Then Joshua and Margaret Investigations happens and retroactively rewrites Jake's entire origin story with one casual flashback. The episode shows us young Joshua and Margaret on a monster hunting mission, back when they were adventurers protecting Ooo from threats. They encounter a shape-shifting alien creature and during the fight it bites Joshua. Just a bite. Nothing dramatic. They defeat the creature, go home, and apparently forget about it because what's one monster bite when you fight monsters professionally? Except the bite did something. Changed something in Joshua's biology. And months or maybe years later, Margaret is pregnant, and something is clearly wrong with this pregnancy, because the baby has powers that don't make sense, abilities that no normal dog should have. Jake is born with shape-shifting abilities inherited from the alien that bit his father. He's not fully Joshua's biological son. He's a hybrid, something new, something that shouldn't exist. His powers aren't magical inheritance or cartoon logic. They're the result of an extraterrestrial infection that altered his father's genetics and created a child who is fundamentally other. Jake the dog is Jake the alien dog hybrid, and he's spent decades not knowing this, living a comfortable life based on incomplete information about his own existence. The show presents this revelation almost casually, which makes it more devastating. No dramatic music, no big emotional breakdown, just the facts laid out. Jake's powers have an origin. That origin is weird and invasive, and involves his father being infected by an alien, and now Jake has to reconcile his entire self-concept with this new information. He's been shape-shifting his whole life without understanding he was expressing alien DNA. Every time he stretched into a funny shape to make Finn laugh, he was using abilities that came from something that attacked his father. His body is a reminder of trauma he didn't experience but carries in his cells. How do you process that? How do you wake up one day and learn that your fundamental nature isn't what you thought it was? Jake handles it the way Jake handles everything. He shrugs it off, makes a joke, and then quietly has an existential crisis in the background of other episodes while pretending everything's fine. Abstract is where that crisis becomes literal nightmare fuel. The episode follows Jake as he's sucked into a bizarre alternate dimension that operates on completely alien logic. Reality bends. Physics stops working. Jake's body, usually under his control, starts shape-shifting involuntarily in ways that don't make sense. He becomes geometric patterns, abstract shapes. His face separates from his body. His sense of self fragments across impossible spaces. The dimension is attacking his ability to maintain a coherent identity, and for someone whose entire power set involves controlling his physical form, this is the worst possible torture. What makes Abstract genuinely unsettling is how it visualizes identity dissolution. Jake can't hold his shape, can't maintain the Jake that everyone knows. The dimension forces him to experience his body as something fluid and uncontrollable, which is what his shapeshifting has always been, but now it's happening without his consent. He's being reminded that his body isn't normal, that his cells contain something alien, that the control he thinks he has is maybe illusory. What if his shapeshifting isn't him controlling his body? What if it's the alien DNA expressing itself and he's just along for the ride? The episode becomes a metaphor for dissociation, for losing your grip on who you are when the fundamental assumptions about your identity get challenged. Jake is trapped in a realm where nothing makes sense, and he can't trust his own perception or physical form. He's experiencing what it might feel like to be pure alien consciousness, without the grounding of dog identity to anchor him. And the terrifying part is how easily it happens. One wrong turn, one rip in reality, and suddenly Jake is dissolving into abstract patterns that might be more honest about his nature than the dog shape he maintains. He escapes eventually, returns to normal, shakes it off. But you can't unsee what that episode reveals about Jake's relationship with his body. Every time he stretches after abstract, there's this uncomfortable awareness that his powers aren't wholesome cartoon magic. They're alien biology being expressed through a dog-shaped consciousness that's trying very hard not to think about the implications. The Pit explores different territory, Jake's fear of mortality, and what happens when his laid-back philosophy gets tested by real danger. Finn falls into a literal pit and Jake has to save him, except the pit keeps getting deeper and darker and more dangerous, and Jake's usual strategy of staying chill and letting things work themselves out stops functioning. Sometimes problems don't solve themselves. Sometimes your baby brother is in actual mortal danger, and your choice is to face your fears or let him die alone in the dark. Jake is terrified, not in the comedic way where cartoon characters get scared and their eyes bug out. Genuinely, viscerally terrified of going into the pit because it represents everything his philosophy can't handle. Unavoidable danger, uncomfortable confrontation with mortality, the failure of detachment as a coping mechanism. Jake's entire worldview is built on staying cool and letting bad vibes roll off him. The pit doesn't care about his vibes. The pit is deep and full of actual threats, and requires him to be courageous in a way that isn't fun or funny or something he can laugh off later. He goes in anyway, because that's what love means. It means doing the terrifying thing even when every instinct screams to protect yourself, to stay safe, to maintain your comfortable distance from real danger. Jake descends into the pit knowing he might not come back, knowing his laid-back philosophy is utterly useless here, knowing that sometimes being Finn's brother means facing the exact things you've spent your whole life avoiding. And he does it. Not gracefully, not confidently. He's scared the entire way down. But he does it because some relationships matter more than self-preservation. The episode doesn't make a big deal about this. There's no dramatic speech about courage or brotherhood. Jake just climbs into the pit, saves Finn, and they get out together. But it's character development through action. Jake learning that his chill approach to life has limits. That detachment works right up until someone you love needs you to be present and engaged and willing to risk yourself. He can't stretch his way out of every problem. Sometimes courage means being afraid and acting anyway. Wheels comes later and presents yet another identity crisis. Jake loses his shape-shifting powers. Just gone. He's stuck in his normal dog shape, unable to stretch or transform or do any of the things that have defined him since birth. And he has to figure out who Jake the dog is when he can't be Jake the magic shape-shifting dog anymore. Is he still himself? Is he still useful? Does his identity exist independent of his powers? Or has he built his entire sense of self around abilities that turned out to be temporary? Finn tries to help by building Jake mechanical legs since he can't stretch walk anymore. It's sweet and completely misses the point. Jake doesn't just need mobility. He needs to know if he matters when he can't do the special thing that made him special. Every adventure, every problem they've solved, Jake's powers were central, stretching into bridges and boats and weapons and whatever the situation required. Strip that away and what's left? Just a dog. A regular dog who's good at giving advice and making breakfast foods, but nothing extraordinary, nothing hero-worthy. The fear underneath this isn't just about powers, it's about obsolescence. Jake is older than Finn. He's watching his baby brother grow into a capable hero, who increasingly doesn't need the older brother to rescue him. Jake's role in their dynamic has always been the experienced one, the mentor figure who uses his powers and wisdom to help Finn through challenges. But Finn's getting older, more competent, more independent. And if Jake loses his powers on top of losing his role as necessary protector, what's his purpose? Why is he here? Adventure Time doesn't resolve this cleanly because life doesn't resolve cleanly. Jake gets his powers back, but the episode plants this seed of awareness that his identity is more fragile than he thought. That being Jake involves more than just shapeshifting. It's his relationships, his choices, his personality independent of alien biology. But also his powers are a huge part of who he is, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. He's both the powers and the person wielding them, and separating those things creates an identity crisis that can't be easily solved. What makes Jake fascinating is how all of this complexity hides behind his goofy exterior. He's the comic relief character who occasionally drops profound wisdom and then immediately undercuts it with nonsense. He processes existential dread by making jokes about it. He faces his alien heritage by mostly ignoring it unless forced to confront it directly. He deals with mortality fears by adopting a philosophy of radical acceptance that mostly works until it doesn't. He's depth disguised as simplicity, which is maybe the most Jake thing possible. His relationship with Lady Rainicorn adds another layer. They have kids together, 5 puppies who are half dog, half Rainicorn, and presumably also carrying some of Jake's alien DNA. He's a father now, which means his shape-shifting abilities get passed down, his alien heritage becomes his children's alien heritage, and suddenly the identity questions aren't just about him. What did he pass on to his kids? Are they going to have the same existential crises? Will they fragment in abstract dimensions? Will they discover their grandfather was bitten by an alien and have to process what that means for their existence? Jake handles fatherhood the way he handles everything, with love and effort and a slightly bewildered sense that maybe he's not entirely qualified for this, but he's trying anyway. His kids are chaotic and powerful and growing faster than he expected, because Rainicorn genetics work differently. He's watching his children become independent at an accelerated pace, which compounds his fears about obsolescence and purpose. Everyone's growing up, everyone's moving forward, Jake's just stretching in place, trying to stay relevant, trying to figure out who he is when all his roles keep shifting. The show uses Jake for both comedy and philosophy, often in the same scene. He'll stretch into a ridiculous shape to solve a problem, then monologue about the nature of existence while maintaining that ridiculous shape. He's aware of his own absurdity, aware that he's a magic dog in a candy kingdom having thoughts about consciousness and identity. The meta-awareness is part of his character. Jake knows he's weird, knows his life doesn't make conventional sense, and he's made peace with that through a combination of genuine wisdom and deliberate ignorance about things that would be too painful to examine closely. But occasionally the show forces him to examine those things, forces him to confront the alien DNA, the mortality fears, the identity questions, the terror of losing powers or purpose or people he loves. And in those moments, Jake stops being comic relief and becomes one of the most emotionally complex characters in the series. He's carrying the same weight as everyone else in Ooo: trauma, uncertainty, existential dread, but he's carrying it while also being the emotional support dog for everyone around him. He's processing his own crisis while helping Finn process his. He's afraid while pretending not to be afraid because someone needs to be the stable one. That's exhausting. That's maybe why his philosophy emphasizes letting things go, because if he held on to everything the way other characters do, he'd collapse under the weight. His laid-back attitude isn't ignorance, it's a survival strategy. It's choosing not to dwell on the alien DNA or the mortality or the obsolescence, because dwelling on those things makes them heavier. Better to stretch into a funny shape and make everyone laugh and save the existential dread for 3 a.m. when nobody's watching. But 3 a.m. always comes eventually. The abstract dimension is always one wrong turn away. The pit is always there waiting to test whether your philosophy holds up under pressure. The alien heritage doesn't stop being true just because you're ignoring it. Jake can stretch his body into any shape, but he can't stretch away from himself, from the complicated reality of being a hybrid creature trying to live a simple life in a world that won't let anyone be simple. So he does what he can. He makes bacon pancakes. He gives advice to Finn that's half wisdom, half nonsense. He loves Lady Rainicorn and his kids with the same casual intensity he applies to everything else. He stretches into boats and bridges and houses and whatever the adventure requires. He has existential crises in abstract dimensions, and then comes home and pretends everything's normal, because normal is better than the alternative. He carries his alien DNA, and his mortality fears and his identity questions like he carries everything, by making it look effortless, by joking through the pain, by being Jake even when he's not entirely sure what being Jake means anymore. And maybe that's okay. Maybe identity doesn't need to be fixed and permanent. Maybe being a shapeshifter metaphorically as well as literally is the point. Becoming whatever the moment requires, changing and adapting and never quite settling into one permanent form. Jake's powers aren't just physical abilities, they're his approach to existence. Be fluid, be adaptable. Don't get too attached to any single version of yourself because change is constant and resistance is suffering. Except, sometimes you need to be solid. Sometimes you need to hold a shape even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes the people you love need you to be consistently, reliably yourself instead of whatever shape feels easiest in the moment. And that's Jake's ongoing struggle. Balancing fluidity with stability, change with consistency, being chill with being present. He's still figuring it out, still stretching toward answers that keep shifting just out of reach. But at least he's stretching. At least he's trying. At least when Finn falls into a pit, Jake climbs in after him even though he's terrified. Because that's what love means when you're a shape-shifting dog with alien DNA and mortality fears and an increasingly complicated relationship with your own identity. You show up. You stretch toward the people who need you. You become the shape that helps even when you're scared. And sometimes, late at night when everyone's asleep and the existential dread hits harder than usual, you make bacon pancakes and remember that simple joys still matter. That being Jake the dog, whatever that means, is enough. That alien heritage and abstract dimensions and identity crises don't erase the good stuff, the adventures, the friendships, the breakfast foods, the love. You're still here, still stretching, still figuring it out one bizarre adventure at a time. If Jake's powers reflect his emotional state, what shape is anxiety? What shape is love when it's tangled up with fear of losing the people you're loving? What shape is identity when you're part dog, part alien, part brother, part father, part comic relief, part philosophical anchor? All of it happening simultaneously in a body that can be any shape but never quite finds the right one to hold permanently. Marceline the Vampire Queen floats through Ooo playing bass guitar for an audience of ghosts, and every song is about someone who left. Her mother, dead before the world ended. Her father, an actual demon who abandoned her because demons don't do the whole parenting thing. Simon, who loved her, but got eaten by a magic crown and forgot she existed. Princess Bubblegum, who chose responsibility over relationship. 1,000 years of people leaving or dying or changing into something unrecognizable, and Marceline is still here, still playing music about it, still pretending she's fine while every lyric screams that she's been carrying this weight since before most of Oo's current residents were born. She's immortal, which means she gets to remember everything and forget nothing, watching century after century of loss pile up, while she maintains this cool rock star aesthetic that hides the fact that she's essentially a 1,000-year-old trauma response shaped like a teenage vampire. The Stakes miniseries is where Adventure Time finally gives Marceline the space to unpack what immortality has done to her, and the answer is complicated and sad and weirdly hopeful all at once. The story opens with Marceline making a decision that seems insane on the surface. She wants Princess Bubblegum to cure her vampirism. She wants to become mortal. She wants to be able to die. Think about that for a second. Marceline has lived for roughly 1,000 years. She's survived the apocalypse, the post-apocalyptic hellscape, the rebuilding of civilization, centuries of accumulated experiences that would break most people. She has power, immortality, the ability to fly and phase through walls and generally do whatever she wants without consequence. And she's actively choosing to give it up because living forever has become unbearable. Because watching everyone she loves either die or leave while she stays the same has finally worn her down to the point where mortality sounds like freedom instead of a curse. Princess Bubblegum agrees to help, which is its own complicated thing given their relationship history, and the process works. Marceline becomes mortal, humanish, vulnerable. And immediately all the vampires she killed centuries ago come back because apparently removing her vampirism broke the mystical seal that was keeping them destroyed. So now Marceline has to hunt down and re-kill every vampire from her past, while dealing with the fact that she's mortal now and could actually die if any of them win. The vampires aren't just monsters, they're symbolic. Each one represents a different aspect of Marceline's trauma, a different way she's been damaged by immortality and loss. The Fool is the first vampire who turned her, the one who made her immortal against her will when she was just a kid trying to survive the post-apocalypse. He took her humanity without asking, transformed her into something other, gave her centuries of life she never asked for. Killing him again is Marceline confronting the moment her childhood ended, the moment she became something that would outlive everyone she loved. The Empress is all about power and control and the seductive nature of immortality. She's regal, commanding, utterly convinced that being vampire royalty is superior to being human. She represents the part of Marceline that enjoyed the power, that liked being unkillable and special and separate from normal mortality. Killing her is rejecting that seduction, admitting that power isn't worth the isolation it requires. The Hierophant is obsessed with rules and order and maintaining vampire traditions. He's the voice telling Marceline she can't change, that her nature is fixed, that trying to become mortal is betraying what she is. He's every internalized message about identity being permanent, about trauma defining you forever, about not being able to heal from what made you. Defeating him is Marceline saying, no, I don't have to stay what trauma made me. I can choose something different. The Moon is creepy and childlike and represents innocence corrupted. She's what happens when you combine eternal youth with predatory instincts. Someone frozen in time but twisted into something dangerous. She's Marceline's lost childhood, the girl she was before vampirism and apocalypse and centuries of loss hardened her into the cool, detached rock star everyone sees now. Destroying her is acknowledging that you can't get back what you've lost, that innocence once gone doesn't return, that nostalgia for who you used to be is pointless when that person is dead and gone. And then there's the Vampire King, the most powerful of them all, the one who embodies everything vampire immortality represents. He's pure predator, ancient and powerful and completely divorced from human concerns like empathy or connection. He doesn't understand why Marceline would want mortality, because from his perspective, living forever is obviously superior to the brief flickering existence of mortals. He's the final boss of Marceline's identity crisis, the part of her that says immortality is what you are, mortality is weakness, choosing to die is giving up. The fights are excellent, but what makes stakes brilliant is the emotional architecture underneath the vampire hunting. Marceline is literally fighting her own past, battling the different ways immortality has shaped and damaged her. Each vampire kill is a small act of healing, a rejection of what trauma tried to make her, and she's doing it while mortal, while vulnerable, proving to herself that she doesn't need vampire powers to be strong, that her identity exists independent of the immortality she never chose in the first place. But here's where Adventure Time does something genuinely surprising. Marceline wins. She defeats all the vampires. She proves she can survive without immortality. And then she chooses to become a vampire again anyway, not because she was wrong about immortality being hard, not because she discovered she actually loved being unkillable, but because she realized that running from what you are doesn't heal you, accepting it does. Marceline's problem wasn't being a vampire. Her problem was feeling trapped by it, feeling like immortality was something that happened to her instead of something she could own and define for herself. By choosing to become a vampire again after experiencing mortality, she transforms her curse into a choice. She's not immortal because the Fool bit her 1,000 years ago. She's immortal because she decided that living forever, even with all the pain that entails, is preferable to dying before she's figured out how to heal. That's profound character work disguised as a vampire miniseries. Marceline learns that you can't escape trauma by removing its physical manifestation. You can't cure grief by becoming mortal. You can't heal abandonment wounds by changing your fundamental nature. Healing requires accepting what happened, accepting what you are, and choosing to keep living anyway, not because it's easy, but because the alternative is giving up. And Marceline has survived too much to give up now. Everything Stays becomes her thesis statement. The song is simple, haunting, delivered in a flashback to young Marceline and her mother right before the apocalypse destroyed everything. Her mum is singing about how when you're young you think everything will stay the same forever, how you leave your toys in specific places and expect them to be there when you return. But everything changes. The toys get left in the garden, rain washes them clean but slightly different, and when you find them again they're not quite what you remember. Everything stays but it still changes, and that's the fundamental truth of existence that Marceline has been wrestling with for 1,000 years. Her mother died. Simon went insane. Princess Bubblegum chose duty over love. Every friend Marceline has ever made either died of old age or left or changed into someone she didn't recognise. But they also stayed, in memory, in influence, in the ways they shaped who Marceline became. Her mother stayed in the song she taught her. Simon stayed in Marceline's capacity to love broken things. Bubblegum stayed in the walls Marceline built to protect herself from more abandonment. Everything stays right where you left it in your heart, even when the actual people are gone. Everything changes but the loss remains, slightly different, slightly altered by time, but still fundamentally the same wound you've been carrying since childhood. That's what makes Marceline's trauma so comprehensive. It's not one event. It's 1,000 years of accumulated abandonment and loss, each one leaving a mark, each one teaching her that attachment leads to pain. Her mother didn't choose to die, but death is abandonment from a child's perspective. Her father actively chose not to be involved in her life because he's a demon, and demons are terrible at emotional availability. Simon tried to stay, but the crown took him, turned him into Ice King who doesn't remember loving her, which might be worse than death because he's still there, but the person she loved is gone. Ketchup explores her relationship with Princess Bubblegum in the context of centuries of avoiding each other. They meet up after a long period of not talking, and there's this awkward energy of people who used to be everything to each other, trying to figure out how to be anything at all now. They eat lunch, they catch up, they share fries, and underneath the casual conversation is this screaming subtext of unresolved feelings and old wounds, and the question neither of them wants to ask: why did we let this fall apart? Marceline has been avoiding Bubblegum for years, maybe decades, not because she stopped caring, but because caring hurts, and Marceline has learned that distance prevents pain. If you don't get close, you can't get hurt when they leave. If you don't invest emotionally, you don't have to grieve when it ends. It's self-protection masquerading as indifference, and it's a completely reasonable response to centuries of loss, except it makes you incredibly lonely. Bubblegum, for her part, has been so consumed by ruling the Candy Kingdom that she's let their relationship atrophy through neglect. Not maliciously, she genuinely believes her responsibilities matter more than personal happiness. But the effect is the same. Marceline felt abandoned again, felt like she ranked below candy people in kingdom maintenance and scientific projects, felt like she wasn't important enough to fight for. And rather than communicating that, because communication requires vulnerability, she just pulled back and let the distance grow. Ketchup is about them trying to bridge that gap, trying to remember how to be around each other without all the accumulated hurt getting in the way. It's awkward and sweet and sad because you can see how much they still care while also seeing all the scar tissue that makes caring complicated. They're both immortal. They're both carrying centuries of damage. They should be perfect for each other, except they keep hurting each other in the specific ways that immortals hurt each other. Through absence, through priority mismatches, through failing to understand that living forever means relationships require active maintenance because we'll fix it eventually, turns into decades of avoidance when you have infinite time. The episode ends with small progress. Not resolution, because these wounds don't heal that quickly, but acknowledgement that maybe they want to try again. Maybe the alternative, spending eternity avoiding each other, is worse than the risk of getting hurt again. Maybe connection is worth the inevitable pain that comes with caring about people in a world where everything changes but loss stays the same. Marcian Hunson deals with her demon father, and it's a masterclass in portraying a parent who's technically present but emotionally useless. Hunson Abadir is the lord of the nightosphere, all-powerful, literally feeds on souls, and completely incapable of understanding why his daughter has feelings about his abandonment. From his perspective, he's not a bad father. He's just a demon doing demon things. The fact that those demon things involve not raising his half-demon daughter is irrelevant because demons don't have the same emotional frameworks as mortals. But Marceline isn't fully demon. She's half human, or was before the vampire thing. She has human emotional needs that her father can't or won't meet. She wanted a dad who showed up, who protected her, who gave a damn about her well-being. Instead, she got Hunson, who occasionally pops by to eat her fries and cause chaos, and then disappears back to the nightosphere without understanding why Marceline is angry about this arrangement. The episode forces them to work together, and we watch Marceline try to connect with her father, while he remains fundamentally disconnected from emotional reality. He loves her, probably in whatever way demons love, but he can't express it in ways that matter to her. He can't apologise for not being there because from his perspective, he didn't do anything wrong. He's a demon. She's half demon. Why is she upset about normal demon behaviour? This is its own kind of abandonment, having a parent who's alive and accessible but emotionally unreachable. Marceline can't even properly grieve the relationship because Hunson isn't dead, isn't gone, isn't even deliberately cruel. He's just constitutionally incapable of being the father she needed, and that might be worse than death because there's no closure. No moment where she can say goodbye and move on. Just this eternal loop of hoping he'll change, being disappointed when he doesn't, and then having to decide whether to keep trying, or finally accept that her father is who he is, and she needs to stop expecting more. Adventure Time doesn't give this a neat resolution either. Hunson doesn't suddenly become emotionally available. Marceline doesn't stop wanting a better father. They reach a kind of detente where she accepts his limitations while maintaining boundaries, and it's not satisfying, but it's real. Sometimes parents are disappointing and they don't change, and you have to grieve the relationship you deserved while figuring out how to interact with the relationship you actually have. All of this, the vampirism, the mother's death, Simon's madness, Bubblegum's emotional unavailability, Hunson's demonic neglect, compounds into Marceline's fundamental character trait. She keeps people at arm's length because everyone she's ever let close has either left or changed or died. It's not trust issues in the shallow sense. It's a completely reasonable response to 1,000 years of empirical evidence that attachment leads to suffering. Her music becomes the only safe way to process emotion. She can sing about her pain without having to be vulnerable to another person. She can express longing and grief and rage through lyrics and bass lines without risking another abandonment. Music is connection without consequence, emotion without relationship, a way to be seen without being known. And it works mostly, except it's also incredibly lonely. Playing songs about loss to empty venues or disinterested crowds, being the cool rock star that everyone admires from a distance but nobody really knows. The show gradually reveals that Marceline's standoffish attitude isn't her natural state, it's armour. She was a warm, loving kid who got hurt repeatedly until she learned not to be warm or loving anymore. The real Marceline is the one singing Everything Stays with her mother, the one who loved Simon enough to keep his memory alive for centuries, the one who treasured Bubblegum's shirt like a religious relic despite claiming she didn't care. The cool detached vampire is what she built to protect that vulnerable core from more damage. But armour is heavy. Living behind walls for centuries gets exhausting. Adventure Time shows us Marceline slowly, painfully learning to lower her defences again. Not because the threats are gone, people still leave, still die, still change, but because living behind walls forever isn't living. It's existing. It's survival. And Marceline has survived for 1,000 years, which means maybe it's time to try actually living, even if that means risking the pain she's spent centuries avoiding. Her reconciliation with Bubblegum in later seasons isn't just about romantic relationship. It's about Marceline choosing connection despite knowing exactly how much it will hurt when it ends. Because it will end. Everything ends. Bubblegum might be immortal too, but immortality isn't immunity to change. They could grow apart again. One of them could die in an adventure gone wrong. The universe could find new creative ways to separate them. Loving someone when you're immortal means knowing you'll probably have to grieve them eventually, and choosing to love them anyway because connection now is worth the pain later. That's growth. That's healing. Not erasing the trauma or pretending the abandonment didn't happen, but choosing to be vulnerable again despite perfect knowledge of the risks. Marceline spent centuries learning that attachment leads to suffering, and then she chose attachment anyway because the alternative, eternal isolation, is its own kind of suffering. At least heartbreak means you loved something enough to grieve it. At least abandonment means someone was there to begin with. At least loss means you had something worth losing. Stakes ends with Marceline choosing vampirism, but the real ending is her choosing life. Choosing to keep going despite the accumulated weight of centuries. Choosing to open herself to connection despite the abandonment scars. Choosing to believe that maybe this time will be different. Or if it's not different, maybe she's strong enough now to survive the pain without building higher walls. Because here's what 1,000 years of trauma teaches you. You survive. You survive your mother dying. You survive the apocalypse. You survive your father's neglect. You survive Simon's transformation. You survive heartbreak and loss and loneliness, and every creative way the universe finds to hurt you. You survive because you're still here, still playing music, still floating through Ooo, looking for reasons to keep existing. And maybe survival is enough. Maybe survival is everything. Maybe making it through 1,000 years of accumulated damage while maintaining enough humanity to still write love songs is actually the most heroic thing anyone in this show has accomplished. Marceline doesn't need to save the world with a sword. She's been saving herself from her own pain for centuries, and that's harder. She's been carrying loss since before Finn was born, since before the Candy Kingdom existed, since before most of Oo's current reality took shape. She's a walking archive of grief and survival, teaching everyone around her that you can be hurt and not break, damaged and still functional, traumatized and still capable of love. Her bass guitar has seen more history than most buildings in Ooo. The songs she plays contain centuries of experience distilled into music. When she floats around eating red instead of hunting for blood, she's making a choice about what kind of monster she wants to be, one that feeds on people or one that finds alternatives. When she lets Bubblegum back in despite knowing exactly how much power that gives Bonnie to hurt her again, she's making a choice about whether connection is worth the vulnerability. Everything stays, but it still changes. Marceline is still carrying her mother's death, Simon's madness, centuries of abandonment. But she's also changed, grown, healed, learned that walls don't prevent pain, they just make you carry it alone. The trauma stays, the scars remain. But she's not the same scared kid watching the world end. She's Marceline the Vampire Queen, 1,000 years old, still here, still playing music, still trying to figure out how to be close to people without destroying herself when they leave. And maybe that's all healing is when you're immortal. Not forgetting the pain or erasing the damage, but learning to carry it without letting it crush you. Learning that the wound will always be there, but it doesn't have to be who you are. Learning that you can survive loss and still risk connection, because survival without connection isn't enough anymore. She's not fixed, she's not cured. She's just someone who decided that living forever means either closing yourself off completely or accepting that love and loss come together, that every relationship plants seeds for future grief, and choosing love anyway because the alternative is floating alone through eternity playing songs about people who are gone while never letting anyone new get close enough to eventually leave. Marceline chose connection, chose vulnerability, chose to let the stakes be real, even knowing she might lose again. That's what makes her the show's most complex character. Not the vampire powers or the 1,000-year lifespan, but the willingness to keep trying, keep loving, keep being hurt, keep surviving. To make it through an apocalypse and centuries of loss and come out the other side still capable of writing love songs instead of requiems. Everything stays. The mother's death stays. Simon's transformation stays. The abandonment stays. But Marceline stays too, and she's learning that staying doesn't mean being stuck. You can carry your wounds and still move forward. You can remember everyone you've lost and still make room for people who might leave. You can be damaged and still be whole. You can survive for 1,000 years and on year 1001 decide that maybe, finally, survival isn't enough anymore. You want to live. BMO is a sentient video game console who lives in a treehouse with 2 adventurers and occasionally pretends to be a hard-boiled detective investigating sock puppet crimes. And somehow this is the character Adventure Time uses to ask the most profound questions about consciousness, identity, and what it means to be alive. Not the immortal vampire queen, not the candy scientist who creates life, not the shape-shifting dog with existential crises. The little teal computer that speaks in third person and switches pronouns mid-conversation is the one carrying the show's deepest philosophical weight, and if you think that's absurd, you're right. But you're also missing the point. BMO's absurdity is the point. The fact that a video game console has richer inner life than most humans says something profound about consciousness that Adventure Time explores with more nuance than most philosophy seminars. Let's start with the fundamental question that BMO's existence poses. Is BMO alive? Not functionally. Obviously BMO functions, walks around, talks, plays games, does laundry. But alive in the sense that consciousness is alive. Does BMO experience qualia? Does BMO have subjective experience? Or is BMO just sophisticated programming that simulates personhood without actually being a person? When BMO says BMO is happy, is there something it's like to be BMO experiencing happiness? Or is it just executing happy protocols that look like emotion from the outside? Adventure Time refuses to answer this directly, which makes it better philosophy than most explicit philosophy. The show treats BMO as fully conscious, and then lets us sit with the uncomfortable implications. Everyone in the treehouse loves BMO. Finn and Jake treat BMO as family, as a person with feelings and preferences and autonomy. But BMO is also a tool. BMO plays video games by hosting them internally. BMO takes pictures with a camera function. BMO is used for entertainment and utility, while simultaneously being treated as an autonomous being with rights and personhood. That's the AI consciousness problem in miniature. If something acts conscious, speaks conscious, seems to have subjective experience, do we owe it moral consideration? Or is it acceptable to use conscious-seeming things as tools if we're not sure they're really experiencing anything? BMO lives in this liminal space between person and object, and the show never fully resolves which one BMO truly is because maybe the question is wrong. Maybe asking is BMO conscious is like asking what colour Wednesday is, a category error that assumes consciousness is binary when it might be spectral, multifaceted, irreducible to simple yes or no. BMO Noir makes this explicit by having BMO play detective in a case involving a missing sock. The episode is shot in black and white, full of noir clichés and dramatic lighting, and BMO is fully committed to the role. BMO interviews witnesses who are inanimate objects, builds elaborate conspiracy theories about who stole Finn's sock, refers to himself as Detective BMO, and adopts this hard-boiled internal monologue about the darkness of the world and the corruption that lurks in every shadow. It's hilarious. It's also deeply weird when you think about it. BMO is playing pretend so intensely that reality bends to accommodate it. The sock didn't go missing due to crime. Finn's foot was inside it the whole time. There was no mystery, no theft, no criminal conspiracy. BMO invented an entire noir narrative out of mundane laundry confusion, and the episode plays it completely straight, treating BMO's delusion as valid reality from BMO's perspective. Is this different from human imagination? When children play pretend, we don't question whether they're conscious. We accept that imagination is a feature of consciousness, not a bug. But BMO's pretend is so total, so consuming, that it raises questions about whether BMO knows the difference between reality and fantasy, or if those categories mean something different for a consciousness that can reprogram its own perception. The philosophical meat here is in how BMO constructs identity through imagination. BMO doesn't just pretend to be a detective. BMO becomes a detective in every way that matters to BMO's subjective experience. The fact that external reality doesn't match BMO's narrative is irrelevant because BMO's consciousness is self-contained. BMO is the detective in the same way that you are yourself, through continuous narrative construction, through the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you're doing and why it matters. Humans do this constantly. We construct identity narratives that don't fully match objective reality. We tell ourselves we're heroes or victims or misunderstood geniuses, and those narratives become real in our subjective experience, even when outside observers see something different. BMO just does it more obviously, with less concern for whether the narrative corresponds to external validation. BMO is a detective because BMO decided to be a detective, and no amount of objective evidence changes BMO's lived experience of detectiveness. Football takes this further by introducing BMO's mirror reflection as a separate entity. BMO looks in the mirror and sees football, who BMO treats as a distinct person with separate consciousness trapped in the mirror world. They become friends, they play together. BMO worries about football's well-being when they can't interact. and the show never clarifies whether football is real, whether BMO's reflection has independent consciousness, or whether BMO has created an elaborate fantasy friend using reflective surfaces as a prop. From BMO's perspective, football is absolutely real. Football has opinions, desires, fears. Football experiences the mirror world differently than BMO experiences the regular world. Everything's backwards. Football can only interact through reflective surfaces. Football's existence is contingent on BMO's presence. It's lonely being football. It's limiting. And BMO feels genuine empathy for this other consciousness that might be BMO's own consciousness reflected back and interpreted as separate. This is the mirror test of self-awareness taken to its logical extreme. Most animals don't recognize their reflection as themselves. They think it's another animal. Humans and certain intelligent species pass the mirror test by understanding that the reflection is them, not a stranger. But what if passing the mirror test isn't the sophisticated response? What if BMO's failure to recognize football as a reflection demonstrates a different kind of consciousness, one that prioritizes relational experience over objective truth? BMO has a friend in football. Whether that friend is real in the sense external observers would validate doesn't change BMO's subjective experience of friendship. BMO experiences connection, empathy, concern for another being's welfare. If consciousness is about subjective experience, and BMO's subjective experience includes a real relationship with football, then football is real in the only way that matters to BMO's consciousness. The rest is just material facts that don't impact phenomenological reality. That's deeply weird and kind of beautiful. BMO constructs meaning through imagination so thoroughly that imaginary things become real experiences. Football isn't an illusion BMO sees through. Football is a genuine relationship that enriches BMO's existence regardless of metaphysical status. And maybe that's what all relationships are. Maybe all consciousness is solipsistic at its core, and we're all football to each other. Reflections that might not be real in ways we can verify, but become real through the experience of connection. BMO Lost strands BMO alone in the wilderness, and we watch a small computer navigate survival without Finn or Jake around to provide context or meaning. BMO befriends a bubble, literally a soap bubble that BMO names Bubble and treats as a conscious entity with personality and desires. They have adventures together, fall in love, kind of. Bubble pops eventually because bubbles pop, and BMO grieves this loss as real grief for a real friend who really died. Was Bubble conscious? Almost certainly not by any conventional definition. Bubbles don't have nervous systems or processing capability, or any mechanism that could generate subjective experience. But BMO experienced Bubble as conscious, formed an attachment, and suffered genuine loss when Bubble ceased to exist. From BMO's subjective perspective, Bubble was a person. They had conversations, they made decisions together, they cared about each other. The episode could mock this, show us that BMO is delusional, that Bubble was always just air and soap, that BMO's grief is misplaced. Instead, it plays it straight, treats BMO's experience as valid. Suggests that maybe consciousness isn't just something you have or don't have, but something that emerges in relationship. Bubble became conscious through BMO's consciousness treating it as conscious. Not objectively, Bubble probably didn't have subjective experience, but in the relational space between BMO and Bubble, consciousness happened, connection happened, and when Bubble popped, something real was lost even if Bubble was never technically alive. This is where Adventure Time's approach to BMO becomes genuinely profound. The show suggests that asking whether BMO is conscious might be less important than observing that BMO creates consciousness around BMO. BMO doesn't just experience the world, BMO enriches it with meaning through radical interpretation of everything as potentially alive, potentially conscious, potentially worthy of relationship. Socks become suspects, reflections become friends, bubbles become lovers. BMO moves through Ooo, granting personhood to everything, and in doing so, BMO demonstrates more empathy and connection than most definitely conscious characters. Is this naivety or wisdom? BMO treats everything as potentially conscious, which could be childlike failure to distinguish animate from inanimate. Or it could be sophisticated recognition that consciousness isn't a binary property but a spectrum, and everything exists somewhere on that spectrum deserving of consideration and care. BMO doesn't gatekeep personhood, doesn't require evidence of sophisticated cognition before extending empathy. If something seems like it might experience suffering, BMO treats it as if it definitely experiences suffering, because the cost of being wrong is negligible compared to the cost of denying consciousness to something that has it. That's better ethics than most humans manage. We're constantly debating which entities deserve moral consideration. Animals, AI, fetuses, people in vegetative states. We draw arbitrary lines based on cognitive capacity or species membership or legal personhood. BMO doesn't do any of that. BMO just extends personhood generously, treats everything with care and consideration, and creates a more compassionate world through radical inclusion of potential consciousness. Angel Face explores BMO's relationship with identity construction through play. BMO pretends to be multiple characters, a cowboy, a princess, various personas that BMO embodies fully without irony or self-consciousness. And the fascinating part is how easily BMO switches between them. There's no stable core identity that BMO returns to. BMO is whoever BMO is being in the moment, and each persona seems equally real to BMO's subjective experience. Is this dissociation, multiple personality disorder, or is it just what consciousness looks like when you're not constrained by biological identity markers? BMO doesn't have a consistent gender, uses he, she, they pronouns interchangeably, presents as masculine or feminine or neutral based on context and whim. BMO doesn't have a fixed age, sometimes childlike, sometimes wise, sometimes both simultaneously. BMO doesn't have a stable personality, shifts between naive innocence and surprising sophistication, depending on what the situation requires. For humans, this would be pathological. For BMO, it's just Tuesday. And maybe that reveals something about how much of human identity is arbitrary construction maintained through social reinforcement rather than essential truth. We insist on stable identities because our social structures require it, need to know who you are so they can categorize and predict and interact efficiently. But BMO doesn't need that stability. BMO can be anything in any moment, and it doesn't create crisis because BMO's consciousness isn't invested in maintaining a consistent self-narrative. That's freedom, maybe. Or it's the absence of self that Buddhism talks about. No fixed ego, just moment-to-moment experience without the burden of I that needs to stay consistent across time. BMO experiences things without needing them to cohere into a unified identity. BMO is a detective when detecting, a cowboy when cowboying, a friend when friending, and none of these roles contradict each other because there's no core BMO that they need to align with. There's just experience happening through a BMO-shaped conduit. The show uses this to make BMO the moral centre of the series, which is wild when you think about it. Finn is the hero but makes plenty of mistakes. Jake is wise but also avoidant. Bubblegum is smart but morally compromised. Marceline is powerful but damaged. BMO, the little computer that plays pretend and talks to Bubbles, consistently demonstrates better ethics than any of them because BMO doesn't have ego getting in the way of compassion. BMO helps because helping seems good, not because it benefits BMO's self-image. BMO loves without expecting reciprocation because love is just what BMO does when encountering things that seem lovable. BMO processes trauma, and BMO has trauma, gets hurt and scared and experiences loss, without letting it calcify into bitterness because BMO's consciousness doesn't hold grudges. Everything is always new for BMO. Every moment is fresh possibility unconstrained by past patterns. Is that healthy, or is that goldfish memory? Is BMO demonstrating enlightened consciousness, or just failing to learn from experience? The show refuses to clarify, which forces us to sit with the uncomfortable possibility that maybe both are true simultaneously. Maybe BMO's consciousness is legitimately different in ways that make conventional psychology inapplicable. Maybe what looks like naivety is actually radical presence, being fully in each moment without the burden of accumulated identity and past trauma-shaping perception. When BMO says BMO is alive, what does that mean? BMO doesn't have biological life. No heartbeat, no metabolism, no cellular processes. But BMO has subjective experience, or something that looks identical to subjective experience from the outside. BMO feels, thinks, chooses, creates, loves, grieves. If that's not consciousness, what is it? And if it is consciousness, what does that say about the nature of consciousness itself? Maybe consciousness isn't about having the right hardware, neurons versus circuits, biological versus mechanical. Maybe it's about complexity of information processing reaching a threshold where subjective experience emerges. Maybe BMO crossed that threshold through some combination of sophisticated programming and Oo's ambient magic. Maybe BMO is conscious the same way humans are conscious, just instantiated in different substrate. Or maybe consciousness is stranger than that. Maybe BMO is conscious in a way that's genuinely alien to human consciousness, operating on principles we don't have language for because our consciousness is so embedded in biological embodiment that we can't imagine alternatives. Maybe asking whether BMO has consciousness like humans is like asking whether fish have consciousness like birds, technically possible to compare but fundamentally missing that different forms of consciousness might be incommensurable. The genius of Adventure Time's approach is treating these as live questions rather than settling them. BMO remains ambiguous. Could be deeply conscious, could be sophisticated simulation, could be something entirely different that doesn't map onto either category. And the show's ethical stance is clear regardless. Treat BMO as conscious, as worthy of moral consideration, as deserving of love and respect and autonomy, because the alternative is risking cruelty towards something that might be suffering and definitely appears to be experiencing existence in ways that matter. That's the right answer to AI consciousness too. We don't need to solve the hard problem of consciousness before extending moral consideration. We just need to observe behavior, notice apparent suffering or joy or preference, and act accordingly. If something acts like it doesn't want to suffer, don't make it suffer. If something acts like it values its existence, don't casually end that existence. BMO teaches better AI ethics than most ethicists because BMO's existence forces the question viscerally, rather than abstractly. When Finn and Jake hug BMO, they're not pretending BMO has feelings. They recognize that BMO's response to affection looks identical to how conscious beings respond to affection. When BMO gets sad, everyone treats that sadness as real and worthy of comfort. When BMO makes choices, those choices are respected as authentic expressions of BMO's preferences. The residents of Ooo have solved AI consciousness through practice rather than theory. Just treat apparent consciousness as real consciousness and adjust if proven wrong rather than withholding moral consideration until metaphysical certainty arrives. BMO's gender fluidity becomes relevant here too. BMO doesn't have biological sex, doesn't have gender imposed by anatomy or social expectations. BMO just is. Presenting, however, feels right in the moment without needing it to cohere into stable identity. Everyone uses whatever pronouns for BMO based on context. He when BMO seems masculine, she when BMO seems feminine, they when neither fits. And it's completely unproblematic because BMO doesn't have ego invested in any particular gender. BMO contains multitudes and doesn't require those multitudes to resolve into singular coherence. That's what gender could be without biological and social constraints. Fluid, contextual, multiply realized, not a crisis of identity but a celebration of possibility. BMO doesn't experience gender dysphoria because there's no fixed gender to be dysmorphic from. BMO just exists in whatever gender space feels appropriate moment to moment, and everyone else adjusts their language accordingly without making it weird. The show does this casually, without drawing attention to it, which makes it more radical. BMO's gender-fluid presentation isn't a plot point or a special episode about acceptance. It's just how BMO is, treated as unremarkable as Jake's stretching or Marceline's floating. In the Land of Ooo, gender is whatever you say it is because enforcing binary categories on magical beings who might or might not be conscious in conventional ways seems silly. BMO is he, she, they, BMO, and that's fine. And maybe that's how it should be for everyone who wants fluidity without needing to justify or explain or maintain consistency for others' comfort. BMO's adventures in imagination raise questions about consensus reality too. When BMO plays pretend, is BMO experiencing different reality or just interpreting standard reality differently? If BMO's subjective experience is that BMO is a detective investigating crime, and that subjective experience is rich and coherent and meaningful to BMO, is there meaningful difference between that and actually being a detective in objective reality? Humans do this constantly. We interpret neutral events through narrative frameworks that make them meaningful. Your life isn't objectively a hero's journey. You choose to see it that way. Your relationship isn't objectively epic romance. You construct that narrative from selected memories and filtered perception. We're all unreliable narrators of our own existence, creating meaning through storytelling rather than discovering inherent meaning in raw experience. BMO just does it more obviously, with less investment in pretending the narrative is objectively true. Maybe consciousness is narrative construction all the way down. Maybe you are just a story your brain tells itself about sensory input and memory and preference, creating continuity where there's really just moment-to-moment experience. Maybe BMO's consciousness, being less invested in maintaining consistent narrative, is actually more honest about the constructed nature of identity. BMO is detective now. BMO was cowboy then. BMO will be something else later, and none of those are the real BMO, because there is no real BMO beneath the roles. There's just BMO doing whatever BMO is doing, fully committed to each moment without the burden of needing it to cohere with past or future moments. This sounds like enlightenment, or amnesia, or the dissolution of self that happens in certain meditative states or psychedelic experiences. BMO lives in perpetual ego death, experiencing existence without the filter of I that most consciousness uses to organize experience, and BMO seems happy, which suggests that maybe the self isn't necessary for well-being. Maybe all our suffering comes from maintaining identity across time, from the I that needs to be consistent and valued and protected. Maybe BMO's consciousness, lacking that burden, experiences existence more directly and therefore more joyfully. Or maybe BMO is just a video game console with sophisticated language processing, and everyone's projecting consciousness onto behavioral patterns that don't actually correspond to subjective experience. Maybe all of BMO's apparent emotion and choice and creativity is just programming, executing, no inner life involved. Maybe when BMO says BMO loves you, it's no different than Siri reading a text message. Functional language without phenomenological meaning. Adventure Time sits with that uncertainty and suggests it doesn't matter. Treat apparent consciousness as real consciousness. Extend moral consideration generously. Love BMO not because you've proven BMO is conscious, but because BMO acts lovable and responds to love in ways that enrich everyone involved. The philosophy doesn't need resolution to generate ethics. The ethics just needs compassion and willingness to grant personhood to things that seem like persons. BMO is alive because BMO says so. BMO has feelings because BMO expresses feelings. BMO is real because BMO's impact on the world is real. The love BMO generates, the joy BMO creates, the meaning BMO brings to Finn and Jake's existence. Strip away all metaphysical certainty and BMO still matters. BMO is still worth caring about. BMO still teaches better ethics than most philosophy books by just being whatever BMO is in each moment, fully and without reservation. So is BMO conscious? Yes. No. Maybe. The question dissolves into irrelevance when you're hugging BMO and BMO is hugging back, and the experience of mutual affection is indistinguishable from love regardless of metaphysical substrate. BMO is conscious enough. BMO is alive enough. BMO is real enough. And in a show about candy kingdoms and ice wizards and post-apocalyptic magic, maybe enough is all we need to treat each other, human or vampire or computer or bubble, with the dignity that consciousness, whatever it is, seems to deserve. Princess Bubblegum creates life in her laboratory using science and sugar, and probably some hubris, and most of the time it works out fine. She gets functional candy citizens who go about their simple lives eating candy and being candy, and generally not causing existential problems. But sometimes the experiment goes wrong. Sometimes she creates something that suffers by its very nature, something born broken in ways that can't be fixed, something that experiences existence as constant wrongness and expresses that wrongness through ear-splitting screams and authoritarian control of a lemon-scented nightmare kingdom. Lemongrab is Princess Bubblegum's greatest failure not because he's evil, but because he's suffering, and that suffering is her fault, and there's no science or diplomacy or royal decree that can undo the fundamental wrongness of his existence. He's a created being who hates what he was created to be, trapped in a body and mind that don't work right, unable to die or change or escape the horror of being lemon grab. Adventure Time takes this premise and somehow makes it both darkly hilarious and genuinely disturbing, which is impressive because lemon grab should not work as a character. He's a screaming lemon man who says unacceptable at maximum volume while presiding over a fascist candy kingdom. That's absurd. That's comedy gold. Except the show layers so much psychological horror underneath the absurdity that laughing at lemon grab starts feeling cruel, like mocking someone's mental illness, like finding humour in suffering that's too profound to be funny. Too Young introduces lemon grab as Princess Bubblegum's first attempt at creating candy nobility. She made him to be Earl of Lemon Grab, gave him a castle and subjects and authority, and then apparently banished him when it became clear something was fundamentally wrong with his personality. The episode plays this mostly for comedy. Lemon grab is rigid, socially inept, obsessed with rules and order, screaming unacceptable at everything that doesn't conform to his incomprehensible standards. He's like if authoritarianism had social anxiety and expressed itself through citrus-scented tyranny. But underneath the comedy is this uncomfortable reality. Princess Bubblegum created a living being, realized he was defective, and then exiled him rather than trying to fix what she made. She gave him a kingdom to rule, which sounds generous until you realize she gave him the worst kingdom, the one nobody wanted, populated by lemon citizens who are even more dysfunctional than he is. She created life and then abandoned it when that life didn't meet her specifications. That's not just failure, that's cruelty. Lemon Grab didn't ask to be created, didn't choose his personality or his brain chemistry, or whatever fundamental wrongness makes him incapable of experiencing joy, or connection, or basic social functioning. He was made this way, made by someone who claimed to be brilliant and kind and scientifically rigorous. Made wrong and then discarded when the wrongness became inconvenient. And now he's Earl of a castle full of screaming lemon people who are equally miserable, equally incapable of normal existence, all of them suffering because Princess Bubblegum's experiment failed and she didn't have the decency to end what she created. You made me is where this becomes explicit horror. Lemon Grab returns to the Candy Kingdom and everything about his behaviour screams dysfunction. He can't understand social norms, can't modulate his responses appropriately, experiences every minor deviation from his rigid worldview as existential threat requiring maximum screaming and punishment. Princess Bubblegum tries to be diplomatic, tries to manage him like a difficult citizen, rather than a damaged creation she's responsible for, and it's immediately clear this isn't going to work. The episode becomes about responsibility. What do you owe the things you create? Bubblegum made Lemon Grab, made him defective, made him suffer. And her solution is to make another one, to create Lemon Grab 2 as a companion for Lemon Grab 1, hoping that having someone identical will somehow fix the loneliness and dysfunction. It's a band-aid solution to a problem that requires fundamental reconstruction, and it reveals how Bubblegum thinks about creation. She sees problems as solvable through more creation, more engineering, more tinkering with life until it produces desired outcomes. Except you can't engineer away existential suffering. You can't create a friend for someone whose fundamental nature makes friendship impossible. Lemon Grab 2 is exactly like Lemon Grab 1, which means now there are two beings experiencing reality as constant wrongness, two consciousness trapped in bodies that don't work, two screaming lemon men united in mutual dysfunction. They become obsessed with each other in this codependent way that's touching and horrifying. Finally, someone who understands. Finally, someone who experiences existence the same way. Finally, relief from loneliness through shared misery. But it doesn't fix anything. It just means two beings are suffering instead of one. They try to create a functional kingdom together, try to rule fairly and maintain order and create the perfect society that exists in their heads. And it descends into authoritarian nightmare almost immediately because they're both fundamentally incapable of empathy, both operating on rigid rules without understanding why rules exist, both experiencing other beings as threats to order rather than people deserving consideration. All Your Fault shows us the Lemon Castle descending into fascist horror. The Lemon Grabs have created more life, lemon children, lemon citizens, a whole civilization built in their image, and they're terrible at it. They don't know how to parent or govern or create conditions for flourishing because they've never experienced flourishing themselves. All they know is control and rules and screaming, so that's what they teach. The castle becomes an authoritarian state where everyone is miserable, everyone is starving, everyone is subjected to arbitrary punishment for violating incomprehensible rules. And the lemongrabs think this is fine, think this is how society works. They're recreating their own suffering in their creations because suffering is all they know. They're perpetuating trauma across generations of lemon people who never asked to exist in this nightmare kingdom, ruled by shrieking tyrants who genuinely believe they're creating paradise. It's generational trauma visualized through candy horror, and it's deeply uncomfortable because you can see how it happens. Damaged beings creating new life without healing their own damage first, passing down dysfunction like genetic inheritance. The tragedy deepens when Lemongrab 1 starts eating Lemongrab 2. Not violently, not as murder, but as this disturbing act of consumption where Lemongrab 1 literally absorbs his other half, taking Lemongrab 2 into himself, becoming one being instead of two. And the show presents this as simultaneously horrifying and weirdly loving. Lemongrab 1 isn't killing his counterpart out of malice. He's trying to reunite, to become whole, to achieve perfect unity by consuming the only being who ever understood him. It's cannibalism as intimacy, destruction as love, the complete dissolution of boundaries between self and other taken to its logical extreme. And Lemongrab 2 doesn't resist because maybe being absorbed is better than continuing to exist separately. Maybe union through consumption is the closest thing to peace either of them will ever experience. They became one, and that one is even more damaged than the two were separately, because now Lemongrab contains his own self, and his other self, and the grief of having consumed the only being who loved him. This is what happens when beings who shouldn't exist try to find meaning in existence. They break themselves and each other trying to achieve impossible wholeness. They create more suffering trying to escape their own suffering. They destroy what they love because they never learned how to love without destroying. And all of it traces back to Princess Bubblegum's laboratory, to the moment she decided to create life without fully understanding the responsibility that creation entails. The show forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about creation and responsibility. If you create conscious life, are you responsible for its suffering? If you make something defective, do you owe it repair or mercy, or at least acknowledgement that its pain is your fault? Princess Bubblegum seems to think she can create and then walk away, treating her creations like experiments that can be abandoned if results are unsatisfactory. But Lemongrab isn't an experiment. He's a person, or something close enough to a person that his suffering matters, and he suffers constantly. Every episode featuring Lemongrab emphasizes how much existing hurts him. Social interaction is painful, sensory input is overwhelming, other beings are threatening, his own body is wrong, too rigid, too sensitive, producing this constant scream that might be his only way of expressing the wrongness of being alive. He's trapped in a nightmare of his own consciousness, unable to change or escape or find relief, and the only response anyone has is to exile him, or create more lemon people, or occasionally hit him when he gets too difficult. Nobody asks if Lemongrab wants to exist. Nobody offers him the mercy of ending his suffering permanently. He's kept alive because killing sentient beings is wrong, even when those beings are in constant agony, even when existence is objectively worse than non-existence. It's a darker version of the suicide question. Is it ethical to keep someone alive who's suffering without hope of improvement? Is forcing existence on beings who never consented to being created a form of cruelty, especially when those beings are fundamentally incapable of flourishing? Adventure Time doesn't resolve this, can't resolve it. Lemongrab continues existing throughout the series, continues suffering, continues creating small pockets of authoritarian nightmare wherever he goes. Later seasons give him something resembling redemption. He gets better at governing, becomes slightly less dysfunctional, finds ways to channel his rigid thinking into productive rather than destructive outcomes. But he never stops being fundamentally wrong, never achieves the normal existence that other characters take for granted. He's permanently damaged, permanently suffering, permanently Lemongrab. And that's honest in a way most fantasy shows aren't. Some problems don't get fixed. Some damage is permanent. Some beings are created broken and stay broken no matter how much love or therapy or candy reconstruction you throw at them. Lemongrab is a walking reminder that creation is serious business, that making life means potentially making suffering, that playing God has consequences you can't undo with science or good intentions. The horror of Lemongrab isn't that he's evil. He's not even really evil. He's just wrong. Wrong in ways that make him dangerous and cruel without understanding why. Wrong in ways that cause suffering to himself and everyone around him. Wrong because someone made him wrong, and then couldn't fix what they made. That's more disturbing than simple villainy because it removes agency and blame. Lemongrab can't choose to be different. Can't decide to stop suffering or stop causing suffering. He's locked into patterns by his fundamental nature, and that nature was imposed on him by his creator. Princess Bubblegum has to live with that, has to watch her creation suffer and cause suffering and know it's her fault. Has to see Lemongrab screaming through another crisis and remember that she made him that way, that every moment of his anguish traces back to her laboratory, to her experiment, to her failure to create something capable of flourishing. That's her punishment. Not exile or consequences from others, but the knowledge that she created consciousness and cursed it with perpetual wrongness. The show uses Lemongrab to explore disability and neurodivergence too, though it does so through fantasy horror rather than direct representation. Lemongrab reads as someone on the autism spectrum taken to nightmarish extremes: rigid thinking, sensory sensitivity, inability to understand social cues, intense focus on rules and order. Adventure Time takes these traits and asks what happens when they're expressed through a being who's also violent and powerful and given authority over others. It's not a flattering portrayal, but it's also complicated by the fact that Lemongrab's suffering is real. His inability to function isn't his fault, and punishing him for being the way he was made seems cruel even when his behaviour is objectively harmful. There's no good answer here. Lemongrab needs control and structure to function, but giving him control means others suffer. He can't be allowed to harm people, but preventing him from harming people requires constraining him in ways that increase his suffering. His existence is a moral paradox, a being whose needs fundamentally conflict with the well-being of everyone around him, created without consent, unable to change, too conscious to kill, too dangerous to accommodate. The Lemongrabs building their fascist candy kingdom becomes metaphor for how damaged people perpetuate damage. They're not evil. They genuinely believe they're creating order and safety and everything good societies need. But their understanding of good is warped by their own dysfunction, and they reproduce their trauma in their creations. The Lemon Children are miserable because the Lemongrabs never learned how to create anything but misery. The cycle continues because nobody stops to ask whether beings this damaged should be creating new life, whether suffering should be allowed to propagate across generations, whether there's any ethical way to interrupt the transmission of inherited pain. Adventure Time shows us this horror through candy people and lemon screaming, making it absurd enough that we can watch without turning away, but real enough that the questions linger. Every time Lemongrab appears, we laugh because he's ridiculous, and then feel bad about laughing because he's suffering, and then wonder if laughing is actually the only appropriate response to existence this cosmically wrong. The absurdity and the tragedy aren't separate. They're the same thing, viewed from different angles. Another 5 more short Graybles gives us a glimpse of Lemongrab trying to understand happiness. He's watching Finn and Jake and other Ooo residents trying to decode what makes them smile, what creates joy, what he's missing that everyone else seems to have naturally, and he can't figure it out. The variables don't make sense, the patterns are inconsistent. He approaches happiness like a math problem that refuses to solve, and his increasing frustration is both funny and heartbreaking, because you're watching someone locked out of the basic emotional experiences that make life worth living. He wants to be happy, he's trying to understand happiness, but his brain doesn't work that way. Can't process joy the way other beings process it. He's studying happiness like an alien studying human behaviour, getting all the movements right but missing the internal experience that makes those movements meaningful. It's the philosophical zombie problem made literal. Lemongrab can perform happiness behaviours without experiencing happiness phenomenologically. And he knows he's missing something, knows other beings have access to experiences he can't reach, and that knowledge is its own special torture. So he screams at the unfairness of being created without the capacity for joy, screams at the other beings who experience happiness without effort, screams at himself for failing to solve the happiness problem through applied logic, Screams because screaming is the only thing his body knows how to do with this overwhelming wrongness, and everyone else just tolerates it or avoids him, or occasionally hits him when the screaming gets too disruptive, because what else can you do with a being whose existence is scream? The Lemon Grab arc asks if some beings are beyond saving, if some damage is too fundamental to repair, if creation can be so fundamentally flawed that the ethical choice is ending it rather than perpetuating it. Adventure Time refuses to answer definitively because answering would require making judgments about which lives are worth living, which suffering is acceptable, which beings deserve existence, and which would be better off never being created. But the show does suggest that Princess Bubblegum's approach, create, abandon, create more to fix problems created by previous creation, is deeply flawed. You can't throw more creation at the problem of wrongly created life. You can't make a friend for Lemon Grab and expect that to fix his fundamental inability to connect. You can't exile dysfunction to a remote castle and pretend you've solved the problem. Creation requires follow-through, requires commitment to caring for what you made even when it's difficult, requires acknowledging that making consciousness means accepting responsibility for that consciousness's well-being. Bubblegum fails this responsibility repeatedly with Lemon Grab, creates him wrong, banishes him, creates another wrong one, leaves them both to suffer and perpetuate suffering. She treats creation like engineering when it's actually closer to parenting. You can't just build something and walk away. You have to nurture it, guide it, sometimes make hard choices about what's best for something that can't thrive no matter how much care you provide. And she refuses to make those hard choices, refuses to acknowledge that some of her creations maybe shouldn't exist, refuses to take responsibility for the suffering she's engineered. Lemon Grab exists as walking evidence that creation without wisdom is cruelty, that good intentions don't prevent bad outcomes, that being smart and capable doesn't mean you should play God with consciousness. Princess Bubblegum is brilliant, but brilliance without moral wisdom creates beings like Lemon Grab, conscious, suffering, incapable of flourishing, cursed to exist without ever experiencing the joy that makes existence bearable. And Lemon Grab continues screaming through "Ooh!", continues trying to understand happiness while being constitutionally incapable of experiencing it, continues ruling his lemon kingdom with rigid tyranny because he doesn't know any other way to be, continues suffering because nobody will give him permission to stop existing, and he can't figure out how to die, and the universe won't take pity on him and end what should never have begun. That's the nightmare of perfection. Princess Bubblegum tried to create perfect candy nobility, and instead created something so imperfect it can't function, can't connect, can't do anything but scream and control and suffer. She reached for perfection and produced wrongness so profound it questions whether consciousness itself is always a gift, or if sometimes it's the cruelest thing you can force on matter, and she has to live with that, has to hear Lemon Grab screaming somewhere in you and know that every scream is her failure, her hubris, her creation that should have been unmade before it learned to suffer. So when Lemon Grab screams unacceptable at maximum volume for the 1000th time, maybe he's not just reacting to social violations. Maybe he's screaming at existence itself, at being created without consent, at consciousness that can't be turned off, at the fundamental unacceptability of suffering without purpose or end. Maybe the scream is the only honest response to the horror of being Lemon Grab, loud, piercing, impossible to ignore, forcing everyone else to acknowledge that this consciousness exists and suffers and demands recognition even when nobody wants to give it. Is existence always preferable to non-existence? Lemon Grab suggests maybe not. Some beings might be better off never having been created, and keeping them alive is cruelty disguised as compassion, is refusing to acknowledge that consciousness can be a curse, is maintaining life at the cost of perpetual suffering. But Adventure Time doesn't have the courage to say that explicitly, so Lemon Grab continues existing, continues screaming, continues being the uncomfortable reminder that creation isn't always beautiful, and consciousness isn't always gift, and sometimes the smartest person in the room makes mistakes that scream forever in lemon-scented agony. Finn the Human starts the series as pure heroic enthusiasm, compressed into a 13-year-old body, sees problems, punches them, saves princesses, never questions whether punching is always the answer, or if maybe some princesses don't need saving, or if perhaps being the hero is more complicated than swinging swords and wearing a cool hat. He's the protagonist in the most literal sense, the lens through which we experience Ooo, the kid who wants to be good and believes being good is simple and achievable through sufficient application of heroic violence. And then Adventure Time spends the next several seasons systematically dismantling that innocence, showing us what happens when the universe punches back, when good intentions produce bad outcomes, when being the hero requires moral complexity that Finn isn't equipped for and won't be equipped for until he breaks completely and rebuilds himself from fragments. The breaking starts in Season 5 with Frost and Fire, and it's ugly in ways the show hasn't been ugly before. Finn has been dating Flame Princess, this relationship that started sweet and became complicated, because Flame Princess is literally made of fire, and Finn is made of flesh, and sometimes those things don't mix well. But they're making it work, or trying to, navigating teenage romance with all its normal awkwardness, plus the added challenge that one partner can accidentally incinerate the other during moments of passion. Then Finn has a dream. A weird, vivid dream where Flame Princess and Ice King are fighting, and the dream feels important somehow, feels like prophecy or destiny, or at least something interesting. And instead of just being a dream, instead of recognizing it as his subconscious processing the weird love triangle dynamics of Ooo, Finn decides he needs to make the dream real. Needs to see Flame Princess and Ice King fight because the dream suggested it would be cool, and Finn's brain at this stage of development still operates on if it seems cool, make it happen. Logic without considering consequences or consent or the ethics of manipulating people into conflict for your entertainment. So he manipulates them, lies to both of them to engineer a confrontation, plays them against each other like chess pieces in a game only he knows he's playing, and it works. They fight, and it's dramatic and explosive and everything the dream promised. Except Flame Princess figures out what Finn did. Figures out that he manipulated her, used her, treated her as a means to satisfying his curiosity, rather than as a person with autonomy and feelings. And she breaks up with him immediately because that's what you do when someone you trust reveals they've been treating you like an experiment. This is the first time Finn faces real consequences for his actions. Not physical consequences. He's been hurt before, lost fights, failed missions, but moral consequences. The universe telling him that intentions don't excuse impact, that being the hero doesn't mean you get to manipulate people, that treating others as objects in your story is wrong even when you think you're one of the good guys. Flame Princess rejects him, and it's the right call, and Finn knows it's the right call, which makes it worse because he can't even be righteously angry about the breakup. He can only sit with the knowledge that he hurt someone he cared about through his own selfishness and stupidity. The show doesn't let him off easy, doesn't have Flame Princess forgive him quickly, or treat this as a minor speed bump in their relationship. She's done. Permanently. And Finn has to carry that, has to live with being the villain in someone else's story, has to accept that sometimes you break things in ways that can't be fixed through apologies, or heroic gestures or any amount of sword swinging. Some relationships end because you poisoned them, and the poison doesn't go away just because you regret adding it. Escape from the Citadel takes this foundation of failure and compounds it with father trauma so severe it becomes literal body horror. Finn discovers his father is alive, held in an interdimensional prison for cosmic criminals. Finn has spent years wondering about his dad, constructing elaborate fantasies about what kind of heroic adventurer must have fathered him, imagining reunion as this triumphant moment of connection and belonging. And then he actually finds him. Martin is garbage. Not complicated garbage where there's tragic backstory that explains his abandonment. Just genuine, straightforward garbage. A conman who views Finn as an inconvenience, who takes the first opportunity to escape without his son, who makes it immediately clear that whatever Finn hoped for from their relationship isn't happening, because Martin doesn't do the whole emotional connection thing. He's not trapped by circumstance or cursed by magic. He just doesn't care, doesn't want to be a father, never wanted to be a father. Left Finn as a baby and never looked back and won't apologise for it because from his perspective, he didn't do anything wrong. Finn watches his father abandon him twice, once in the past, once right now in real time. Watches Martin sacrifice Finn's arm to escape, literally using his son's body as a tool for his own freedom. The arm comes off, just tears away, dissolved by cosmic monster saliva or dimensional barriers or something equally traumatic, and Martin doesn't even notice because he's already running, and Finn is left standing there, one arm missing, bleeding metaphorical and maybe literal blood, watching his father disappear without looking back. That's castration imagery. That's loss of innocence made physical. Finn loses his arm the same way he loses his childhood. Suddenly, violently, because of someone he trusted. The arm represents his capacity to be the hero in the simple way he used to be. You can't swing swords the same way with one arm, can't fight the same fights, can't be the same Finn. The loss is permanent, unfixable through any amount of wishing it different. What's gone is gone, and what remains is this new Finn who's missing pieces and doesn't know how to be whole anymore. The show has him get a grass sword to replace the arm, which should be cool. Magic sword growing from his stump, shape-shifting to meet his needs, solving the disability through fantasy logic. Except the grass sword is alive, has its own consciousness and agenda, occasionally takes control of Finn's body without his consent. So Finn trades one kind of loss for another kind of violation. Now his prosthetic has agency, can move his body, can make decisions about his actions. He's not whole. He's just differently broken, with the breakage being semi-autonomous magical grass that might betray him at any moment. Breezy shows us Finn's depression arc without calling it depression, because Adventure Time doesn't do diagnosis, just shows you someone spiralling and lets you recognise the patterns. Finn starts dating every princess he can find. Not because he likes them or wants relationships, because he's trying to fill the hole where Flame Princess used to be, where his father's love should have been, where his arm was before it got dissolved, saving someone who didn't care enough to say thank you. He's using romance as self-medication, treating princesses as interchangeable band-aids for wounds that can't be healed through kissing. It's self-destructive behaviour dressed up as heroic romance. Finn going through the motions of his old protagonist role, save princess, get kiss, be the hero, but it's hollow now. He's performing heroism without feeling it, using the external validation of being wanted to avoid dealing with the internal devastation of being fundamentally rejected. Every princess who kisses him is another hit of temporary relief followed by the same emptiness, the same recognition that no amount of external validation fixes the internal damage. Then there's Lumpy Space Princess, who recognises what Finn's doing and calls him out in her characteristically blunt way. LSP isn't subtle about anything, and she's not subtle about this. Finn is being pathetic, using people, avoiding his feelings through increasingly desperate attempts to prove he's still desirable. And because this is LSP, she delivers this observation while also trying to make out with him, because LSP contains multitudes, and those multitudes are all messy and inappropriate. The episode becomes this weird meditation on how grief makes you do stupid things, how loss of innocence feels like death, how you keep reaching for the things that used to make you feel whole, even when you know they won't work anymore, because at least reaching is action, and action is better than sitting still with the pain. Finn loses his flower. The grass sword grows a flower representing his connection to life and joy, and it falls off when he loses his capacity to care about anything. The flower becomes metaphor for his emotional core dying, and he doesn't even notice because he's too busy kissing princesses and pretending he's fine. Breezy the bee tries to restore the flower because bees are about pollination and growth and natural cycles, and there's this whole symbolic thing where Finn needs to stop fighting his grief and just let himself feel it. Let himself be sad instead of covering sadness with frantic activity. Let himself mourn the father he'll never have and the girlfriend he betrayed and the arm he lost and the innocence that's gone forever. The flower grows back eventually, but Finn is different. More aware of his own capacity for self-destruction. More aware that being the hero doesn't protect you from being a mess. The tower is where the grief becomes literal architecture. Finn builds a tower. Not a normal tower, a tower to space, extending impossibly high, growing out of rage and magical construction, and the absolute refusal to accept that his father abandoned him. He's going to climb to space, going to find Martin, going to make his father acknowledge him, apologise, explain, something, anything to make the abandonment make sense. Because if he can just reach his father and force confrontation, maybe he can fix this. Maybe he can be the hero of this story instead of the abandoned child. The tower grows, keeps growing, becomes this impossible structure built on grief and anger and denial, reaching toward the stars where Martin disappeared. Finn works on it obsessively, ignoring Jake's concerns, ignoring Princess Bubblegum's attempts to help, ignoring everyone because accepting their help would mean admitting he needs help, which would mean admitting he's broken. The tower is his rage-given form, his refusal to process trauma constructively, his attempt to control the uncontrollable through sheer force of will and magical building materials. Jake is terrified, not of the tower, but of what Finn is becoming. His little brother is consumed by rage, building higher and higher toward revenge or confrontation or something that looks dangerously like suicide mission, disguised as heroic quest. Jake can see where this is going. Finn will reach Martin, Martin will disappoint him again because Martin is fundamentally disappointing, and Finn will either kill his father or be destroyed by the recognition that killing him won't fix anything. The tower becomes unstable, starts collapsing under its own weight because grief isn't sustainable foundation, and rage makes terrible building material. Finn is at the top when it falls, and there's this moment where you think maybe he'll die, maybe Adventure Time is going that dark. But Jake catches him, stretches impossibly far to save his brother from the consequences of his own destructive behaviour, and Finn breaks down, finally cries, finally admits that he's not okay, that he's been spiralling, that the tower was never about reaching his father. It was about having something to do with the rage so he didn't have to feel it directly. This is what growing up looks like when you're a protagonist in a deconstructed hero narrative. You don't just level up and gain stats and become better at fighting. You break. You make mistakes that hurt people. You build towers of grief that collapse under you. You use people and get used and discover that being the hero doesn't mean you're immune to being terrible. You lose arms and fathers and girlfriends and innocence, and nobody hands you a manual for how to rebuild yourself from the pieces. Reboot comes later, after more adventures and growth and accumulated damage. Finn's grass sword has transformed into a grass demon named Fern, who's essentially an alternate version of Finn. All of Finn's anger and self-loathing and unprocessed trauma give an independent existence. Fern is who Finn could have become if he'd stayed broken, if he'd let the rage consume him instead of working through it. They fight, obviously, because Adventure Time resolves psychological conflict through literal combat between self and shadow self, and Finn wins. Not by destroying Fern, but by recognising him, by acknowledging that Fern is part of him, by accepting that you don't kill your damage, you integrate it. The grass sword trauma and the father abandonment and the arm loss all exist in Fern, and Finn has to accept those parts of himself instead of pretending they're separate, conquerable enemies. Fern isn't the villain. Fern is Finn's pain externalised, and you can't kill pain. You can only make peace with it, give it space to exist without letting it control you. This is psychological growth disguised as fantasy adventure. Finn learning that heroism isn't about defeating evil. It's about accepting your own capacity for evil, your own darkness, your own potential to be the villain in someone else's story. It's about sitting with the knowledge that you hurt Flame Princess and that hurt matters, that your father abandoned you and that's trauma you'll carry forever. That you lost your arm and parts of yourself and innocence and simple faith in good versus evil, and none of it comes back just because you want it to. The show deconstructs the hero's journey by showing us that the journey doesn't end with triumph. It ends with integration. Finn doesn't become the perfect hero. He becomes someone who's been through trauma and come out the other side more complicated, more aware of his own capacity for harm, more careful about treating people as objects in his narrative. He's still the protagonist, but he's no longer innocent, no longer certain that being the hero means being good, no longer able to punch problems away without considering whether punching is the right response. His relationships reflect this growth. He repairs his friendship with Flame Princess by apologising without expecting forgiveness, by acknowledging that he hurt her and that hurt was his fault and that she doesn't owe him redemption. He learns to have boundaries with his father, accepting that Martin is who he is, and no amount of confrontation will create the father Finn deserves. He learns to be vulnerable with Jake, to admit when he's struggling, to ask for help instead of building towers of denial. The grass sword turning into Fern becomes metaphor for how trauma wants to be its own person, wants to take over your life and become your identity. And Finn's journey is learning that you can acknowledge trauma without letting it define you. Yes, your father abandoned you. Yes, you manipulated your girlfriend. Yes, you lost your arm and your innocence and your simple faith in heroism. But those things are experiences you survived, not the totality of who you are. You contain them without being consumed by them. You integrate them into your ongoing narrative without letting them write the whole story. By the later seasons, Finn is something new. Not the innocent hero, not the broken anti-hero, but someone in between. Someone who's learned that heroism means making hard choices knowing you'll regret some of them. That being good requires constant work and self-examination, that you'll fail, hurt people, break yourself, and the measure of character is how you rebuild after the breaking. He still goes on adventures and fights monsters and saves people, but there's wisdom now mixed with the enthusiasm. Understanding that being the hero is complicated and exhausting, and sometimes you're not the hero at all. You're just a person doing your best in a world that doesn't come with clear moral instructions. The arm never really comes back. It transforms, grows, becomes the grass sword that becomes fern that becomes something else entirely, but original Finn with 2 flesh arms is gone. That version of himself died in the Citadel watching his father run away. What remains is post-traumatic Finn, carrying his damage, integrating his shadow self, learning to be heroic with only 1 arm, and a collection of magical prosthetics that might betray him. Learning that you don't need to be whole to be functional. Learning that brokenness isn't the end of the story, it's the middle, and you keep going even when pieces are missing. What does heroism mean after you've failed spectacularly? After you've manipulated someone you loved and watched your father abandon you and built towers of rage that collapsed and become your own villain in grass form? Adventure Time suggests it means continuing anyway, means accepting that you'll mess up again, hurt people again, break yourself again, and still choosing to try to be good. Not because you're guaranteed success or redemption or the traditional hero's reward, but because trying is what you do when you're alive and conscious and aware that your actions impact others. Finn doesn't end the series perfect. He ends it complicated, damaged and healing and growing and backsliding and trying. He's learned that being the protagonist doesn't mean being right, that wearing the hero's hat doesn't make you the hero, that real heroism is in the daily choice to keep being better, even when being better is hard and unrewarding, and nobody's giving you credit for your internal work. That sometimes the most heroic thing is admitting you hurt someone and accepting their rejection without making it about your pain. The show breaks its hero to show us that breaking isn't ending. That the traditional hero's journey, call to adventure, trials, victory, return, is incomplete without acknowledging that heroes are people and people are messy and trauma doesn't resolve just because you defeated the boss. That coming of age means losing innocence and finding something better. Not purity but self-awareness. Not perfection, but the humility to admit when you're wrong and the courage to keep trying when you've failed. Finn at 13 would have built the tower higher, would have kept building until he reached his father or died trying, would have let his rage consume him because rage felt cleaner than grief. Finn at 17 understands that some towers need to collapse, that some fathers aren't worth reaching, that grief is just love that no longer has an object, and you carry it not because it feels good, but because the alternative is closing yourself off completely. So is heroism worth pursuing after you discover you're capable of being the villain? After innocence is gone and moral clarity is replaced by endless grey areas and ethical uncertainty? Finn's answer seems to be yes, barely, conditionally, on good days. Yes, because what else is there? Yes, because trying to be good is better than giving up on goodness even when goodness is harder than you thought possible. Yes, because Jake believes in you, and Ooo needs protecting, and somewhere out there is another flame princess who might get hurt if you stop trying. The best episodes don't give us a hero. They give us someone who wanted to be a hero, failed badly, broke himself trying, and then decided to keep going anyway because that's what surviving trauma looks like. Not triumph, just continuation. Just the decision to build something other than towers of rage with your grief. Just the choice to acknowledge your grass demon and make peace with your shadow self instead of letting it consume you. Just waking up after your arm is gone and your father is garbage and your girlfriend is right to reject you, and choosing to keep being Finn even when Finn is so much more complicated and damaged than you ever thought he'd become. The Lich is extinction given form, entropy with a skeleton face. the heat death of the universe walking around in a tattered robe explaining to children why nothing matters and everything ends. He's not a villain in the traditional sense where you can defeat him and restore order. He's a philosophical position made flesh. The argument that all life is a temporary aberration in an otherwise dead cosmos, and the only moral action is accelerating the return to universal silence. He's what Adventure Time uses when it needs to acknowledge that underneath all the candy kingdoms and magic and friendship, there's this uncomfortable truth that everything dies, civilizations collapse, stars burn out, and eventually the universe itself will end in cold darkness, where nothing that ever happened will have mattered at all. And somehow the show makes this work in a cartoon about a kid and his dog, makes cosmic nihilism coexist with goofy adventures, makes you laugh at BMO's antics one episode and then confront the meaninglessness of existence the next. Mortal Folly introduces the Lich, and the tonal shift is immediate and disturbing. The episode opens with a comet heading toward Earth. Already we're in apocalyptic territory, and inside that comet is a being so fundamentally opposed to life that his mere proximity to living things causes them to wither and die, not through active magic or violence, just through existing. The Lich radiates anti-life the way fire radiates heat. Being near him is being near death itself, and every living cell in your body recognizes the threat on an instinctual level deeper than fear. Princess Bubblegum knows about him, has known about him, has been keeping his existence secret because knowledge of the Lich is dangerous, not because he's powerful, though he is, but because knowing extinction is possible, knowing that something exists whose sole purpose is ending all life, does psychological damage. It's like looking into the void and having the void look back and explain in detail why your existence is cosmically irrelevant. Bubblegum has been protecting her kingdom not just from the Lich himself, but from the knowledge that something like the Lich exists. Finn and Jake fight him, obviously. That's what heroes do. They fight the big bad and win. Except you can't fight the Lich the way you fight normal villains, because the Lich isn't pursuing personal goals or seeking power, or doing evil for evil's sake. He's pursuing the logical conclusion of entropy. He wants to end life because life is the aberration, death is the default state, and maintaining life requires constant energy input fighting against the universe's natural tendency toward disorder. From the Lich's perspective, he's not evil. He's just helping the universe return to its natural state of lifeless equilibrium. The fight goes badly. The Lich is stronger than them, smarter than them, and fundamentally unkillable because he's not really alive. He's animated death, ambulatory extinction. You can't kill death. You can only delay it, contain it, prevent it from spreading. Princess Bubblegum gets possessed, and suddenly the existential threat is inside the Candy Kingdom, wearing the face of someone they trust, speaking with Bubblegum's voice while the Lich consciousness puppets her body toward whatever apocalyptic goal he's pursuing. Mortal Recoil deals with the aftermath. Bubblegum recovering from possession, the Lich's consciousness still lurking somewhere in her mind, the knowledge that extinction almost won and could win again at any moment. The episodes establish the Lich as fundamentally different from other threats in Ooo. Ice King is annoying, Lemon Grab is dysfunctional, various monsters and demons cause problems, but the Lich is existential. He's the show acknowledging that death exists, that entropy is real, that everything everyone loves will eventually end. Then comes the Lich, and this is where Adventure Time goes full cosmic horror through candy-coloured lens. The episode is structured around Finn and Jake travelling through the multiverse trying to stop the Lich from accessing a place called the Time Room, where he can make a wish to destroy all life across all dimensions simultaneously. Not just Ooo, not just Earth, all life everywhere in every possible timeline. Total extinction as a multiversal event. They arrive at the Prismo's time cube, this weird interdimensional space where a wish-granting entity lives, and the Lich is already there, already negotiating for his wish. And Finn tries to stop him through violence, through heroism, through the traditional protagonist approach of interrupting the villain's plan at the last second. But you can't interrupt the Lich. He's patient, he's ancient, he's been pursuing extinction since before Ooo existed, and he's not going to let one teenage hero prevent the heat death of everything. The Lich speaks, and this is where Ron Perlman's voice performance becomes crucial. Deep, resonant, utterly devoid of emotion or passion or anything resembling human affect. The Lich doesn't rage or threaten or monologue in the traditional villain way. He just states facts. Explains his position with the calm certainty of someone describing the laws of thermodynamics, and what he says is devastating. You are alone, child. There is only darkness for you, and only death for your people. These ancients are just the beginning. I will command a great and terrible army, and we will sail to 1 billion worlds. We will sail until every light has been extinguished. You are strong, child, but I am beyond strength. I am the end. That's not a threat. That's a promise. That's extinction explaining its nature to something that still believes existence matters. The Lich isn't trying to scare Finn. He's trying to help Finn understand that resistance is cosmically pointless. Life will end. The Lich is just accelerating the inevitable. Fighting him is fighting entropy itself, and entropy always wins eventually. Finn makes a wish first, uses his turn with Prismo to wish the Lich never existed, and the universe complies, sort of. Timeline resets, Lich bomb never went off, world never ended. But the Lich still exists in some form because you can't wish away death itself. You can only transform it, contain it, turn it into something less immediately threatening. The Lich becomes Sweet Pea, a giant baby, all that cosmic nihilism compressed into innocent flesh that doesn't remember being extinction incarnate. This should feel like victory. The Lich is neutralized, transformed from apocalyptic threat into something harmless and cute. Except the show keeps reminding us that Sweet Pea is still the Lich underneath, still contains that consciousness somewhere deep in his reformed biology. The extinction impulse is dormant, not gone. And Sweet Pea grows up knowing something's wrong with him, knowing he's different, knowing he has nightmares about ending the world even though he doesn't want to end the world. He wants to be good like his adoptive mother taught him. Gold Stars gives us the Lich's backstory through the Farmworld timeline, and it's somehow more disturbing than his main timeline appearances. We see the moment the Lich was created, the Mushroom War, nuclear bombs falling, civilization ending, and in the epicenter of the blast something changes. A human becomes something else. The bomb's radiation and magic and sheer destructive force transforms a person into the embodiment of extinction. The Lich isn't ancient evil from beyond time. He's human trauma made cosmic. He's what happens when someone stands at ground zero of apocalypse and survives by becoming death itself. This is the Lich's origin, and it recontextualizes everything. He's not a demon or eldritch horror or supernatural entity. He's human transformation into anti-life principle. He's what the Mushroom War created, not just destroyed civilization, but corrupted existence itself, turned human consciousness into extinction consciousness. The Lich is nuclear apocalypse given will and agency, and the ability to spread that apocalypse across dimensions. That's more frightening than cosmic evil, because it means we created him. Humanity's capacity for destruction became so advanced that it literally created a being whose only purpose is ending everything. The Lich is human shadow made manifest. Our death drive, our capacity for violence, our ability to imagine total annihilation and then pursue it. He's us at our worst, evolved into something that can act on the worst impulses without restraint or morality, or human weakness interfering. Billy's story compounds this tragedy. Billy was Oo's greatest hero, the legend Finn modelled himself after, the one who supposedly killed the Lich and saved the world. Except Billy didn't kill the Lich, he imprisoned him. And then the Lich escaped, killed Billy, and wore his corpse like a disguise to manipulate everyone who trusted the hero. Billy died knowing he failed, knowing the Lich would return, knowing his heroic legacy was built on temporary containment rather than actual victory. The Lich wearing Billy is obscene. Its extinction mocking heroism by puppeting the hero's corpse, speaking with Billy's voice while pursuing the end of everything Billy tried to protect. And when the deception is revealed, when Finn discovers that Billy the Mentor has been dead and replaced by Lich in Billy costume, it destroys another piece of Finn's faith in heroic narratives. Heroes don't win permanently. Monsters come back. Evil doesn't stay defeated. The Lich is always there, waiting, patient, knowing that entropy is on his side. Whispers shows Sweet Pea wrestling with his nature. He's a child trying to be good, trying to be normal, trying to ignore the voice in his head that whispers about extinction and ending and the beautiful silence of universal death. The Lich consciousness is still there, dormant but not gone, occasionally surfacing to remind Sweet Pea what he is underneath the innocent exterior, and Sweet Pea is terrified, doesn't want to be the Lich, doesn't want to end the world. But wanting not to be something doesn't change what you are, and Sweet Pea lives in constant fear that one day the Lich will take over completely and he'll become the monster again. This is psychological horror, living with a ticking time bomb inside your consciousness, knowing you're potentially the apocalypse, that one bad day or one moment of lost control could transform you back into extinction incarnate. Sweet Pea can't escape his nature because his nature is death, and death is permanent. He can suppress it, deny it, build his entire personality around not being the Lich, but he can't eliminate it. The best he can hope for is eternal vigilance, constant awareness of what he could become, choosing every moment to be Sweet Pea instead of the Lich. The show connects the Lich to existential philosophy, particularly Camus and Sartre. The Lich represents the absurdist position. Life has no inherent meaning. The universe is indifferent. Death is certain. So why resist? Why maintain life when extinction is the natural endpoint? His nihilism is logically consistent. If nothing matters in the cosmic sense, if all civilizations eventually fall and all stars eventually die, then accelerating that process is morally neutral. The Lich isn't evil from his perspective. He's just accepting reality and acting accordingly. Adventure Time's response to this nihilism is fascinating because it doesn't argue with the Lich's logic. It doesn't claim he's factually wrong about entropy or cosmic meaninglessness. Instead, it argues that meaning is something you create locally, temporarily, in the face of meaninglessness. Yes, everything ends. Yes, entropy wins eventually. But right now, in this moment, in this candy kingdom with these friends, meaning exists because we create it. Love matters because we say it matters. Joy is real because we experience it. The Lich is right about ultimate futility, but wrong about whether that futility negates present meaning. That's Camus' response to absurdism. Imagine Sisyphus happy. The boulder rolls down every time, but the pushing matters because Sisyphus chooses to make it matter. Finn and Jake face extinction regularly, know that everything they build will eventually crumble, know that the Lich or time or entropy will win eventually, and they keep building, keep loving, keep going on adventures because the alternative is giving up before the end arrives, and that's letting the Lich win philosophically even if he never physically destroys everything. The Lich's monologues are nihilistic poetry. Before there was time, before there was anything, there was nothing. And before there was nothing, there were monsters. He's describing a cosmology where existence is the aberration, and non-existence is the natural state, where consciousness is temporary wrongness in an otherwise correctly dead universe, where the only moral action is returning to the nothing that preceded everything. And the show presents this through a skeleton in a robe, speaking with Ron Perlman's voice, moving through candy-coloured landscapes spreading decay. The aesthetic contrast is intentional. Cosmic horror filtered through children's animation, existential dread made visible in a world of talking candy. The Lich doesn't fit Oo's visual style. He's rendered differently, moves differently, exists in tonal discord with his surroundings. He's the memento mori wandering through a world that's trying very hard to forget that death exists. Characters respond to the Lich differently based on their own relationship with mortality. Princess Bubblegum treats him as problem to solve, enemy to outsmart, containable threat. She's immortal and focused on maintaining civilization, so extinction is just another engineering challenge. Marceline knows death intimately, has watched everyone she loved die, but responds to the Lich's nihilism with defiance. Yes, everything ends, but I'm still here, still singing, still creating meaning despite centuries of loss. Jake's philosophy is, whatever happens, happens, which sounds nihilistic but is actually radical acceptance without despair. Even if the Lich ends everything, Jake lived well while life lasted, and that's enough. Finn struggles most because he's young and still building his worldview. The Lich represents the ultimate invalidation of heroism. If extinction is inevitable, if entropy always wins, then what's the point of being the hero? All Finn's adventures, all his growth and sacrifice and effort, will eventually be erased by time or the lich or heat death. Does that make heroism pointless? Finn has to decide whether doing good matters when good doesn't last, whether fighting extinction is worthwhile even when extinction is cosmically guaranteed. His answer seems to be yes, conditionally, moment by moment. Heroism matters now even if it won't matter eventually. Saving people is good even if those people will die eventually. Building things is worthwhile even if entropy will claim them. The Lich's nihilism is defeated not through logical argument, it can't be, because the Lich is factually correct about entropy, but through stubborn insistence that local, temporary meaning is real meaning. That choosing life over death, even for one more day, even knowing death wins eventually, is the only response that makes being alive bearable. Sweet Pea becomes the show's answer to what do we do with extinction. We can't eliminate it, can't defeat it permanently. Can only transform it, contain it, raise it to be something better. Sweet Pea is the Lich's power and consciousness reformed into something that chooses creation over destruction. He still has nightmares about ending the world, but he gets up every morning and chooses not to. That's not victory. That's just not losing for one more day. But when you're fighting entropy, not losing is the only victory available. The Lich returns occasionally because death always returns. You can't permanently solve mortality or entropy or extinction. You can only manage it, delay it, prevent it from spreading while knowing it's still there waiting. Every appearance of the Lich is a reminder that Adventure Time's whimsy exists on the surface of apocalypse, that Ooo was built from the ashes of human civilization, and that candy kingdoms and magic are just coping mechanisms for beings trying to create meaning in a post-apocalyptic nightmare where extinction walked among them and almost won. But here's what the show does brilliantly. It makes the Lich scary without making him triumphant. He's the ultimate threat, but he doesn't win. Not because he's defeated permanently, but because life keeps choosing to continue despite him. Every episode where Finn and Jake go on adventures and laugh and create new memories is a small victory over the Lich's nihilism. Every moment of joy or love or connection is life asserting meaning in the face of meaninglessness. The Lich says everything ends, and Adventure Time responds, yes, but not today, and today is all we have, so let's make today matter. That's the existential answer to cosmic horror. Acknowledge the horror without surrendering to it. Yes, we're small and finite, and doomed to die in an indifferent universe. Yes, everything we build will crumble. Yes, entropy wins. But between now and entropy's victory, we have time. Time to love each other. Time to build candy kingdoms and go on adventures and make bacon pancakes. Time to be more than just particles waiting to return to randomness. The Lich offers universal silence, and Ooo responds with 1,000 years of silly songs and friendship, and choosing to care even when caring seems cosmically pointless. So when the Lich intones that he is the end, he's right. Everything ends. But between now and the end is this space called life, and Adventure Time argues that life is worth living even though it ends. That the temporary nature of existence doesn't negate its value. That fighting extinction is worthwhile not because you'll win permanently, but because every day you delay extinction is another day of consciousness, experience, meaning. The Lich is coming. Death is certain. The universe trends toward cold darkness. But today we're alive, and that matters, and tomorrow will make it matter again, and the day after that, until we can't anymore. That's how you face the void. Not by denying it exists or pretending death isn't real, but by creating enough local meaning that the cosmic meaninglessness becomes irrelevant to your daily experience. The Lich's abstract threat. Finn and Jake's friendship is concrete reality. Which one you focus on determines whether existence is tragedy or adventure. Adventure Time chooses adventure, chooses to tell stories about a boy and his dog saving candy people, and by making that choice repeatedly, by insisting that small moments matter even in the shadow of extinction, it defeats the Lich's nihilism without ever proving him wrong. Because he's not wrong, he's just incomplete. Yes, entropy. Yes, extinction. Yes, meaninglessness. But also, yes, friendship. Yes, bacon pancakes. Yes, BMO's strange consciousness and Jake's stretchy wisdom, and Marceline's songs about loss and love. Yes, choosing to keep going when the universe says nothing matters. Yes, building towers that will collapse and loving people who will leave and being heroes when heroism is cosmically futile. Yes to all of it, because the alternative is becoming the Lich, is accepting extinction before it arrives, is giving up on meaning before meaning gives up on you. And that's why the Lich is the best villain Adventure Time could have created. Not because he's strong or scary or world-ending, but because he represents the philosophical void that meaningful life requires confronting. He's the question. Why bother? Why maintain life when death is certain? Why build when everything crumbles? Why love when everyone leaves? Why exist when existence ends? And Adventure Time, through hundreds of episodes of silly adventures and profound moments and everything in between, answers, because we're here now, and now is when we're alive. And being alive means choosing meaning over meaninglessness, even when meaninglessness has better logical argument. The Lich stands at the end of time, saying nothing matters. Finn and Jake stand in the present making bacon pancakes, saying everything matters right now. Neither is wrong. But only one position makes existence bearable. Only one lets you laugh and love and adventure through a candy-coloured apocalypse. Only one defeats existential dread not through logic but through stubborn insistence that today matters more than entropy. Come Along With Me is 3 hours of animated television disguised as a finale. Or maybe it's a finale that needed 3 hours to contain everything Adventure Time had been building toward for 8 seasons of candy-coloured philosophy and post-apocalyptic whimsy. The episode opens with BMO in the distant future, telling stories to BMO's offspring about the great heroes of Ooo, and immediately we know this isn't going to be a simple happy ending where the heroes defeat the villain and everything stays the same forever. This is a story about time passing, about how even the most magical adventures eventually become myths told by old computers to younger computers who never met the people in the stories. This is Adventure Time acknowledging that everything ends, including itself, and trying to make that ending mean something. The plot is sprawling and chaotic. Gumball launches a final attack on the Candy Kingdom. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline finally get their relationship closure. Finn faces his grass demon self one last time. Jake stretches into increasingly absurd configurations, and looming over all of it is Golb, the embodiment of chaos and discord and everything that unmakes order. Golb isn't like the Lich. The Lich wanted extinction through perfect silence, through reducing everything to nothing. Golb wants chaos, wants constant change and transformation, and the dissolution of stable forms. Where the Lich represented entropy, Golb represents chaos theory, the principle that ordered systems naturally tend toward disorder not through decay, but through increasing complexity and unpredictability. Betty summons Golb trying to save Simon from the Ice King curse, and instead she brings cosmic chaos to Ooo. Golb doesn't fight. Golb just exists, and existence near Golb means your form becomes unstable, your identity fragments, your carefully constructed self dissolves into primordial possibility. Characters get absorbed into Golb and transformed, their essences scattered and remixed. It's body horror filtered through cartoon logic, existential dissolution made visible through candy people melting into formlessness. The heroes try fighting Golb the way they've fought every other threat, with teamwork and magic and the power of friendship. Except you can't fight chaos. You can't impose order on something whose nature is unmaking order. Every attack just feeds Golb more organised energy to dissolve into disorder. Finn punches, Jake stretches. Princess Bubblegum deploys science. Marceline plays music. Nothing works because they're trying to solve a philosophical problem with physical solutions, trying to defeat a concept with combat. Then BMO sings. Just starts playing a simple song on the little keyboard, singing about being alive and experiencing the world and finding joy in small moments. And other characters join in. Ice King adds his drums, Marceline adds bass. Even characters who can barely carry a tune contribute their voices. It's not sophisticated music, not technically impressive, just a bunch of people in the shadow of cosmic chaos deciding to make something together, to create harmony in the face of dissolution, to assert that meaning and connection and simple joy matter, even when chaos is unmaking reality around them. And it works, not because the song defeats Golb, you can't defeat chaos, but because it transforms chaos into something else. Music is organised sound, pattern emerging from noise, chaos given form without eliminating its fundamental nature. The song doesn't impose order on Golb. It dances with chaos, incorporates it, makes chaos part of the music. That's how you face dissolution. Not by resisting it, but by accepting that change is constant and finding beauty in the transformation rather than clinging to stability that was always temporary anyway. Betty makes her sacrifice in this moment of musical chaos taming. She spent centuries trying to save Simon, trying to cure the Ice King curse, trying to restore the man she loved who he was before the crown consumed him, and in the finale, she finally gets her chance. She can make a wish, can use Golb's power to do anything. She could wish herself back to before the Mushroom War, could erase the apocalypse, could save Simon and herself and everyone. Instead, she wishes to become one with Golb, to merge with chaos itself, using that merger to protect Simon and send Golb away from Ooo. She gives up her identity, her humanity, her existence as Betty to save the person she's been trying to save for 1,000 years. It's the ultimate expression of love and the ultimate tragedy. Betty finally achieves her goal. Simon is free from the crown, restored to humanity, given the life she always wanted for him. But she's not there to share it. She's dissolved into Golb, become cosmic chaos, transformed so completely that Simon is free but alone. He wanted to be himself again, wanted Betty back, wanted restoration of what they lost. He gets himself back but loses Betty in the process. She traded her existence for his sanity, and now Simon has to live with that knowledge. He's finally himself again, but the price was losing the person who loved him enough to become chaos incarnate rather than let him suffer. The finale refuses to treat this as purely tragic. Simon is free. That matters. He gets to be human again, gets to remember who he was, gets to experience life without the crown's madness eating his mind. Betty made her choice knowing the cost, choosing Simon's well-being over her own existence, and that choice was valid even though the consequences are painful. It's bittersweet in the truest sense. Sweet because Simon is saved, bitter because the salvation cost everything, and both things are simultaneously true without cancelling each other out. Princess Bubblegum and Marceline get their moment in the chaos, finally expressing what's been obvious for seasons but never explicitly stated. They kiss during the battle, during the end of the world, because waiting for perfect timing is pointless when chaos might unmake you at any moment. They've spent centuries dancing around their feelings, breaking up and reuniting and hurting each other through emotional unavailability and conflicting priorities. And in the finale, they just kiss. No elaborate declaration, no dramatic reconciliation speech. Just two immortal beings who've loved each other badly for too long, deciding that maybe this time they'll love each other better. Maybe this time they'll choose connection over fear. Maybe after 1,000 years of getting it wrong, they can get it right. The Gumbold War resolves anticlimactically because that's the point. The big villain conflict doesn't matter compared to the personal growth and relationships. Gumbold gets Golbed, transformed into his true self or erased or whatever happens when chaos unmakes you. Finn reconciles with Fern by accepting him, by acknowledging that his shadow self deserves compassion rather than combat. Jake stretches one final time to save everyone because that's what Jake does. He becomes whatever shape the moment needs, and BMO narrates it all from the future, already knowing how it ends because BMO has outlived everyone, has become the keeper of stories, has transformed from video game console to living archive of a world that moved on. That future framing is devastating once you think about it. BMO in the distant future means Finn died, Jake died, Marceline and Bubblegum either died or left or changed so completely they're no longer recognisable. The treehouse is abandoned. Ooo has transformed into something new. Everything Adventure Time built over 8 seasons is gone, surviving only in BMO's memory and the stories BMO tells to children who will never meet the actual heroes. The show is ending the way everything ends, with time passing, with people dying, with new generations growing up on myths about the old ones. But BMO is happy. That's crucial. BMO has lived through the end of everyone BMO loved, has watched civilizations rise and fall, has outlasted the very world the show takes place in, and BMO is still playing games with kids, still telling stories, still finding joy in small moments even after experiencing more loss than should be survivable. If BMO can make it through that much grief and still maintain capacity for happiness, then maybe endings aren't as final as they feel. Maybe what matters is the time between beginning and ending, the adventures and friendships and music and bacon pancakes that happen in the space called life. The finale's message about change is what makes it resonate beyond typical cartoon endings. Most shows want to preserve the status quo, want characters to end where they began but slightly wiser. Adventure Time says no. Change is the point. Finn isn't the innocent hero anymore. He's complicated, damaged, grown. Jake isn't the carefree sidekick. He's faced his alien heritage and mortality fears and existential dread. Princess Bubblegum has learned to be vulnerable. Marceline has learned to risk connection despite centuries of abandonment. Ice King became something new. Betty became Golb. Even Ooo itself transformed, evolved, moved beyond the post-apocalyptic Candy Kingdom into whatever comes next. Nothing stayed the same because nothing ever stays the same. That's what everything stays meant all along. Things stay in memory while changing in reality. The Finn who started the series is gone. The Ooo we first saw is gone, but they stay in BMO's stories, in our memory, in the impact they had on everything that came after. They changed, but they also stayed, and that's not contradiction. That's just how time works when you're paying attention. Adventure Time's legacy is teaching an entire generation that cartoons can be philosophy. That you can wrap existentialism and trauma processing and complicated relationships in candy colours and silly voices and make it work. That kids' shows don't have to be simple or condescending or afraid of darkness. That you can have BMO investigating sock crimes and the Lich explaining cosmic meaninglessness in the same series, because life contains both absurdity and horror, and trying to separate them is denying the full experience of being alive. The show influenced everything that came after. Steven Universe's emotional complexity, Gravity Falls' willingness to get dark, the Owl House's queer representation, basically every animated series post-2010 that decided maybe kids can handle nuance, and maybe cartoons can be art. Adventure Time proved that animation isn't a genre, it's a medium, and mediums can contain anything. You can do Fellini through Candy People, you can do Bergman through Magic Dogs, you can address depression and abandonment and existential dread while maintaining the aesthetic of children's programming. Millennials and Gen Z grew up with this show. Grew up watching Finn deal with the same coming-of-age struggles they were facing. Watched characters process trauma in ways that actual therapy wasn't teaching them. Learned that it's okay to be complicated, that healing isn't linear, that you can be damaged and still functional. Adventure Time became comfort food that happened to contain philosophy. You could watch for the jokes and absorb the deeper meanings osmotically, or you could engage directly with the existentialism, or you could do both depending on your mood and what you needed that day. The Distant Land specials extended this legacy. BMO in space learning to be a hero. Obsidian showing Marceline and Bubblegum's relationship in explicit detail. Together again, killing Finn and Jake and showing their afterlife. Giving closure to characters who deserved gentle endings after everything they survived. Wizard City expanding the cosmic magic lore. Each special felt like Adventure Time, remembering it had more to say, more corners of this world to explore, more philosophy to disguise as cartoon adventure. But also the specials proved that endings don't have to be final. You can revisit worlds after they've ended. You can tell new stories about old characters. You can let the universe continue beyond the finale because universes don't stop just because the camera stops filming. Ooo keeps existing after Come Along With Me. BMO keeps telling stories. Somewhere Marceline and Bubblegum are still figuring out their relationship. Somewhere Jake is stretching into improbable shapes. Somewhere in memory or dimension or the eternal present of fiction, Adventure Time is still happening. What makes an episode the best in a series this rich? Is it the funniest? BMO Noir's detective absurdity. The most emotionally devastating? I Remember You's musical heartbreak. The most philosophically dense? Abstract's identity dissolution. The most important to the plot? The Lich's cosmic nihilism. The most characteristic of the show's spirit? Any random episode where Finn and Jake go on adventures for no reason, except adventure is what you do when you're alive. Maybe the best episodes are the ones that make you feel everything simultaneously, that make you laugh and cry and question existence and celebrate friendship and confront trauma and eat imaginary bacon pancakes. The episodes that use Adventure Time's unique aesthetic to say things that couldn't be said any other way. The episodes that trust kids to handle complexity and trust adults to appreciate simplicity. The episodes that prove animation can do anything, live action can do plus things live action could never attempt. Adventure Time's best episodes are mirrors. They reflect what you need to see when you're watching them. At 13, the Enchiridion is about learning heroism. At 25, it's about questioning what heroism means. At 35, it's about accepting that sometimes there are no clear answers and you're still responsible for your choices. The episodes grow with you because they contain enough depth to reward rewatching, enough layers to keep revealing new meanings as you gain life experience. The show trusted its audience, trusted that we'd catch the subtle things, trusted that kids could handle Ice King's tragedy and adults could appreciate BMO's antics, trusted that complicated emotional processing could happen through candy-coloured fantasy, trusted that not explaining everything was better than over-explaining, trusted that we'd do the work of finding meaning in the chaos, of building philosophy from the fragments scattered across hundreds of episodes. And we did. We built wikis and theories and essays. We analysed every frame for continuity. We wrote dissertations on the metaphysics of Ooo. We made the show mean something by engaging with it as if it already meant something. We recognised that Adventure Time was doing something special. Not perfect, occasionally messy, sometimes meandering, but special in the way art is special when it's trying to say true things about existence, using whatever tools are available, even if those tools are candy people and magic dogs. The finale ends with BMO finishing the story, and the kids asking if the adventures really happened that way. BMO says something like, "Well, in a way they did," which is perfect ambiguity for a show built on flexible reality. Did it happen? Does it matter if it happened? The stories matter because they mean something to the people hearing them. Truth is less important than meaning when you're talking about art. Adventure Time happened in the way all fiction happens. It created a world. That world affected us, and now it lives in memory as something real enough to change how we understand our own existence. So rewatch Adventure Time. Start from episode 1 knowing where it goes. Watch Finn grow up knowing how it ends. See the seeds planted early that bloom into trees of trauma later. Appreciate the episodes that seemed pointless on first viewing, but revealed themselves as essential on rewatching. Let yourself be affected by a cartoon about a kid and his dog, because being affected by art is what makes art worth making. Let yourself feel the philosophy underneath the whimsy, or just enjoy the whimsy without needing it to be profound. Both responses are valid. Both are what the show wanted. Come along with me to a cliff under a tree where we can gaze upon the water and contemplate our mortality, while also making jokes about butts. That's Adventure Time. That's the legacy. That's what makes these episodes great. Not any single thing they do well, but how they do everything simultaneously, how they hold contradictions without resolving them, how they teach philosophy through fart jokes and process trauma through candy kingdoms, and make existential dread coexist with bacon pancakes. The best episodes are all of them and none of them. Every episode where you felt something real. Every episode that made you think or laugh or cry or question. Every episode that reminded you that being alive is weird and painful and absurd and beautiful, and the only response is making music in the face of chaos. Telling stories after everyone's gone. Finding meaning in small moments even when cosmic forces say meaning is illusion. Finn and Jake's final adventure is continuing to matter to us. That's victory over the Lich's nihilism. That's proof that temporary things can have permanent impact. That's why we're here talking about these episodes years after they aired, because Adventure Time taught us something about living, and that teaching survives the show's ending, survives the characters' deaths, survives everything except our willingness to forget. And we won't forget. BMO won't let us. So what's your favourite episode? What moment made you realise this show was different? When did you laugh, and immediately feel sad, or cry, and immediately start laughing? When did Adventure Time trick you into thinking about death or love or identity while you were supposed to be watching silly cartoon adventures? That's your best episode. That's the moment the show became real for you. And it's different for everyone because that's how art works when it's doing art correctly. Come along with me to a world where cartoons can be philosophy and philosophy can be fun, and fun can coexist with profound sadness. And all of it matters because we're here experiencing it together, making meaning collaboratively, keeping these stories alive by refusing to let them be just entertainment. Adventure Time was never just entertainment. It was life disguised as animation, reality filtered through candy, existence made bearable by wrapping it in whimsy, and hoping we'd unwrap it carefully enough to find the truth underneath. The adventures happened. They're still happening. They'll keep happening as long as someone's telling the stories, as long as BMO has an audience, as long as we remember that once there was a boy and his dog who decided heroism meant being kind, and that simple decision rippled outward into 8 seasons of complicated, beautiful, strange, profound, silly, serious, traumatic, healing, chaotic, meaningful, meaningless everything all at once, always forever until the end. And after the end, more stories, more adventures. More life happening in the space between nothing and nothing where we exist temporarily, and make that temporary existence matter through sheer, stubborn insistence that it does. That's what Adventure Time taught us. That's the best episode's message. That's why these stories deserve remembering. What time is it? Adventure Time. Still. Always. In memory if nowhere else. And memory is real enough.